want to do public comment today, we have a sign-in sheet. It helps me orderly bring people up for their turn. So just in case, please sign in. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Everyone, I'll call the Board of Supervisors to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Supervisor Giammi.
Here.
Supervisor White.
Here.
Supervisor Jones. Supervisor Schutte.
Here.
Mayor Bagwell.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is our invocation, and I believe Pastor Bruce Henderson is here today. Thank you.
Let's pray. Lord, this morning I realize that so many of my prayers are for me, for requests, and sometimes for demands. I thought maybe it would be great this morning if I just praised you a while. Praise you, Father, for a beautiful morning. I praise you for the privilege of living in this community. And I praise you for those who guide our community. And for the first responders, fire department, the sheriff's office, law enforcement, healthcare workers, families and merchants and citizens, Lord, we praise you and we thank you. We ask that we might be the people endeavoring to be who we need to be for you and for others. Bless this meeting this morning. I pray in your precious and holy name. Amen.
Thank you so much. Would you do us the honor of also leading us in the pledge? Pastor? Would you do that for me? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful invocation this morning. Thank you. We're now going to move on to agenda item 5, which is our public comment period. We will start with, as a reminder to everyone in the audience, your public comment is limited to 3 minutes, please. Is there any public comment on the phone?
There are no callers at this time.
Okay, then we're going to go down here, and it has a question mark, but I'll ask her. Ms. Trustees, did you want to testify? Yes, I would. Come on up, your turn.
Good morning. My name is Joy Trushinsky.
Good morning.
We have a birthright given to us by God, and that birthright is based on liberty. Our founding fathers expressed this truth in our Declaration of Independence, stating that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving from the consent of the governed. The United States Constitution outlines the powers given to the federal and state governments, but gives the supreme power to the people. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Unfortunately, there is a general misconception that any law passed by Congress or state legislatures constitutes the law of the land. This is not true. The truth is that any law passed by Congress or a state legislature that violates the United States Constitution is not valid. The Supreme Court in 1803 upheld this truth in Marbury versus Madison by stating, all laws that are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void. This past year, mostly the Democrat-controlled state governments violated our constitutional rights with unnecessary year-long lockdowns and mask mandates due to the COVID-19 virus, which is similar to the flu. What was so diabolical about this is that very early on, doctors like Simone Gold and 16 others came out with cures to the COVID-19 virus, including hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. But they were silenced. These drugs were banned and people died. Also, Dr. Gold and others said masks do not protect you from COVID-19 virus and are experimental untested vaccines, and they are dangerous. They were maligned, but these doctors were speaking the truth. Look up the information about COVID-19 viruses, masks, vaccines, and your constitutional rights as at American frontline doctors. I say to everyone, we are not obligated to wear masks or take the vaccine, and we should stand for our rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Straczynski. I have Ms. Reba on the list for testimony, but she is a participant directly with the items that she requested, so we will have hers at the time of the item.
Mayor, I need to leave by 10 o'clock. I don't know if the item would be heard before.
It will. It will. If not, I'll move it. So, thank you. I don't have anyone else signed up for public comment, but I see Mr. Shirk, so come on up.
Good morning. My name is Jim Shirk. Recently at the Adam Hubs, the mayor talked about the business unemployment, businesses, and opportunity in Carson City. There was a $25 fee for attending this event. I believe the mayor has a duty and a responsibility to provide the information to citizens free of charge. The big question is, will the mayor? We shall see. In a previous board meeting, I stated the mayor personally on her own forbids the public to speak on an agenda item. I did receive an email from the mayor stating, and I quote, "It is true that I can't allow comment during each individual item." The mayor also stated that she will not allow the public to comment on agenda items due to the virus, as she will restrict seating. Mayor, look at this room. Every seat is taken. You're allowing this room to be filled to the brim, and no access or seating restrictions are being applied. So how can you justify setting these so-called virus seating restrictions at other times during the Board of Supervisors meeting? You can't, but you do it anyway. The city website where today's agenda is posted, there are numerous agenda packets posted from one of those, here is a quote. "It is Carson City's aspirational goal to provide item-specific public comment as follows. In order for members of the public to participate in the public body's consideration of an agenda item, the public is strongly encouraged to comment on an agenda item when called for." End of quote. Let me repeat. The public is strongly encouraged to comment. But you, Mayor, strongly oppose the notion of allowing citizens to comment. Most likely any future agenda packets will remove any and all similar-like directives because it's collateral damage to the mayor for not allowing citizens public comment on agenda items. People in power abuse their position and power. Restricting citizens' right to free speech is most certainly a manipulation of power and position held by the mayor. My research of all of the 2020 Board of Supervisors meeting shows that at no time were citizens ever given an opportunity to comment on agenda items. The mayor's mandate of restricting public comments due to the virus is deceitful and fraudulent scheme to silence citizens. A recall of the mayor should be open for discussion. This is directed to the 4 board members who were elected to represent the citizens of Carson City. You have a duty and a responsibility to make sure citizens have a right to free speech after each agenda item. So all of you who oppose the mayor of restricting that, raise your hand. Maurice is the only one that opposes. That's great. It will be interesting if any board member will stand up for the citizens' right to speak, because you were elected.
Thank you, Mr. Shirk. Your 3 minutes has expired. We appreciate your comments.
My name is Jim Shirk. You can reach me at ilovecarsonCity@gmail.com.
And just for the record, I speak at lots and lots of meetings. I do not have anything to do with whether or not there's meals provided and fees are charged. That's outside of my control. I speak for free. So just to clarify that on the record, I've never charged anyone to come and speak at their meetings. Okay, is there any other public comment? Ms. Budge?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Supervisors, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I'm really pleased to let you know that our Prison Hill Recreation Area, Fifth Street Trailhead, has received national recognition for an award, which is such an amazing accomplishment. I'm going to read this because it's a lot. The Coalition for Recreation Trails chose the project as the winner of the Annual Achievement Award for Outstanding Use of Recreation Trails Program Funds in the Community Linkage category. This is a really big deal for Carson City, and I'm so proud of the staff and all of our partners, and I just wanted to quickly thank them. Public Works Department was critical to the project. They did all the project design and the construction administration. Muscle Powered and Great Basin Institute helped with our trails. Boy Scouts installed steins and benches. The Nevada State Parks was our fiscal agent and really was a champion for the project. And then lastly, I just wanted to thank the open space team. They're really small but mighty, and they do amazing things. And I just wanted to let you know all about that wonderful award.
Well, that's exciting news. We're happy to hear those good things. Your team really works hard. Please express on our behalf how much we appreciate their good work. And thanks for the good news. One last call, unbeknownst to many from the past speech. Is there any further public comment that anyone would like to make that didn't sign up? No? Okay, then I'll just make a couple of announcements for the agenda handling. Items 21A and 21B will not be heard today. We have a little bit more work to do there, so those will be pushed to the next agenda item. Item 14B and 14C will be pulled from the consent agenda and will be heard with item 16C. They will all be heard together. We will take separate motions, of course, but just so the public is aware of the process. Okay, we're now on to agenda item number 6, which is for possible action, approval of our minutes of August 19th. I submitted a couple of typographical issues. Does anyone else have any changes? If not, I'll accept a motion on the minutes, please.
I move to approve the meeting minutes for August 19th, 2021 with the aforementioned and submitted typo corrections.
I second.
I have a motion and a second for approval with correction. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 7, which is our special presentations. We're going to do a Constitution Day, and I've asked Mr. White to please read that proclamation for us, and then we'll do our length of services. So if you'll join me on the floor, please.
Good morning. Indeed, September 17th is a very important day in our history. Proclamation, Constitution Day, September 17, 2021. Whereas the United States Constitution consists of 4,400 words and is the oldest and shortest written constitution of any major government in the world. And whereas, according to John Adams, the United States Constitution constitutes the greatest single effort of national deliberation that the world has ever seen. And whereas, in the words of Albert Einstein, the strength of the Constitution lies entirely in the determination of each citizen to defend it. And whereas on May 25, 1787, our founders convened in Philadelphia to begin work on a new United States Constitution. And whereas on December 8, 2004, President George W. Bush signed Public Law 108-447, declaring September 17 to be Constitution Day and United States Citizenship Day, and the week following would be Constitution Week. Whereas Constitution Day, together with Independence Day, affords all Americans the chance to learn about their nation's founding and its governing principles, which are an important and unifying part of their cultural heritage as citizens. And whereas Constitution Day recognizes the importance of the American experiment and the blessing that accrue to a nation of free people whose rights and liberties are safeguarded by a written constitution. Now, therefore, I, Lori Bagwell, Mayor of Carson City, Nevada, and the Board of Supervisors do hereby recognize September 17, 2021 as United States Constitution Day and reaffirms its commitment to support the rights and privileges of its citizens under the United States Constitution, which, for 234 years, has been the guiding force behind the most enduring democratic system of government in the world. Dated this 16th day of September 2021. So on the back table, I have placed some constitutions that you can take with you and read the Constitution and understands what it says. And on a personal note, I would like to encourage all elected and appointed government officials to recognize the authority of the United States Constitution and work within that authority. Thank you.
Tomorrow will actually be at the library. The Daughters of the American Revolution, the Battle-Born chapter, has a wonderful display in the library about the Constitution, and we'll be doing a celebration on Constitution Day there. So I'd like to invite any of you that would like to come and see the great display case at the library too. Would be wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. White. I really appreciate that. Very nice. Okay, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is also a whole bunch of fun. This is where we celebrate and say thank you to our employees, which, you know, we couldn't have a city without their great work and who they are. And so this is the time we get to celebrate. So the first one, wow, 25 years of service. I have to read that twice, right? To see if that's real. So will Mary Bell Gutierrez? Come on up. I like to double it, but I don't know that you'll make it another 25. At least 5? Me? Oh boy, I'm really working her here. Okay. Well, we appreciate all that you do. Thank you so much, and please join us for a picture. Okay, this one's still pretty good, 15 years, but he's got a little bit of catching up to do there with Mary Bella. How about Frank Morningham? Yeah, our detention manager. Thank you so much for all you do. I really appreciate it. I know what a tough job it is, but I know you do a great job too. So thank you. Please join us for a picture. And then another one with 15 years. Wow, well, check this out. How about Elizabeth Patterson, who works with the sheriff's office? For support. Thank you so much. Do I have 15 more years in you? Oh, look at that. We got one. I had to keep working it. Thank you so much for all you do. Please join us for a picture. so much. And then just a tour. Family or friends that want to join. I know often there's family members that come to celebrate with their loved ones. Anyone want in with a picture? Because we're happy to do it. We're happy to do it. It might be one of those pictures you look back 20 years later, right? And you say, oh, that was so great that you celebrated. That's what it's all about. I like that. Thank you so much. Oh, that's right. Celebrate. So middle these days. Oh, yes, more? Oh, right on. You're a dead
Make sure there's nothing in the drawer.
tape where we, have you- Thank you all so very much.
I'm gonna, since it's time now, do all three. Scott, ready? Okay, all right, just so he knows. Yeah, tell him I'm coming up. Okay, we're going to, that is so much fun. And thank you, Mr. White, for doing the proclamation. We're going to now move on to the consent agenda again, with the exception of 14B and 14C. Those items are going to be heard next as a group.
I had asked the city manager to pull 12A as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't
and
aware of
Ms.
that.
Budge is here to address those concerns.
Okay, does anybody want anything else pulled? If not, I'll accept a motion for the approval of the remaining consent agenda items.
I move to approve the consent agenda consisting of item 8A, 9A, 10A, 11A, 13A, 14A, and 14D as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to move on with agenda item 12A, discussion and possible action regarding an interlocal contract between NDOC and the Parks and Recreation Open Space Department. Ms. Budge?
I didn't prepare a presentation, just
No,
available
it's
for
not
question.
needed. Mr. White has some specific questions he feels
Right, so
should be discussed.
based on our emails earlier this week on term of the contract, the actual cost and how many inmates that will be used on this project, can you clear that up for the public?
I'd be happy to. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. Supervisor White, so in the past, we have had anywhere up to 20 inmates, depending on the season, depending on availability. Inmates are selected in priority order. The state receives inmate use first. So for example, the Nevada Division of Forestry gets several inmates and they use for firefighting activities. So obviously, there's probably very limited limited inmates available because of that use right now. They have told us, obviously, there's challenges with COVID. Not every inmate has been vaccinated. There's some challenges with that. We may get up to 10 if we're lucky right now. But with our seasonal staffing shortage and having no inmates, we're really desperate. So even if we get a couple, we would really be appreciative of that. So as far as the cost, how we came up with the do not exceed amount, the $188,000. This new agreement would be for 4 years. The current budgeted amount in quality of life is $32,000, $30,000 from park maintenance quality of life, $2,000 from open space quality of life, with an additional anticipated $15,000 per year is what we're estimating because of the increase in the cost from previous years. So that equals per year. So that'd be 47,000 times 4 comes to the 188,000. So just to clarify the do not exceed amount. We would never, of course, spend more than our allocated budget. We do have funds in undesignated quality of life, should we need to have additional budget authority for that.
Thank you.
Any further questions of Ms. Budge? Okay, seeing none, I'll accept a motion. Supervisor White?
I move to approve item 12A, the contract for inmate labor.
I have a motion, a second for approval of the contract on 12A. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Budge. Okay, what we're going to do, as previously discussed, we're going to take item 14B, 14C, and 16C. I'm going to open the hearing on each of those items. First, the staff is going to give us an overview of those items. Then I will have Ms. Reba and Mr. Qualls come in and let us know what their concerns are on those items, and Ms. Cortez. So if you will start, please, with the conflict counsel contracts, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Max Cortez, Court Administrator. Thank you for your time this morning. I was speaking with Mr. Reese, and he suggested that we started with the conflict counsel contracts. So the conflict counsel contracts have been in existence for many years. They provide services to indigent persons when the state public defender declares a conflict. We have had 3 conflict counsel attorneys providing those services for, I want to say, for at least 15 years. In, I want to say, August of this year, Mr. Daniel Spence, who is an attorney providing those services, he notified me that he is no longer interested. He has other aspirations of being a judge in another county. And so he was going to put in his resignation. I told him, go ahead and do that. Good luck to you, and please give the city and the courts notice. He did do that. The resignation letter is part of the, I believe, part of the packet. During that conversation, he shared that the new temporary regulations from the indigent defense were very burdensome. That was causing him to spend a great amount of time trying to comply, and that was one deciding factor for him. He shared that, and I asked him, is that in confidence, or can I share that? And he said, no, you can absolutely share that. So after that, I went to the Internal Finance Committee with City Manager Nancy Paulson, Sherry Russell, I believe a representative from the District Attorney's Office, and I submitted the IFC request and essentially gave them an overview of the conflict counsel contracts, the services Mr. Spence was providing, and Mr. Malone, who had called and said that he was interested in coming back to the conflict counsel contract, and he had been approved by the Indigent Department of Defense Services, Indigent Defense Services, and he provided a letter stating that he was approved to take over the contract. It is a professional contract. during the Internal Finance Committee, I recommended to them that they review the compensation for all of the conflict attorneys. I had also had a conversation with Mr. Noel Waters, who's a conflict of counsel attorney, and Walter Fay, who's also a conflict of counsel attorney, and they echoed what Mr. Spence indicated, that the time was very burdensome. They used to be able to take private cases. They are going to have to hire clerical staff, or the existing part-time staff that one of the attorneys had was going to have to go to full-time. So they really asked if it could be a consideration for the city to increase those contracts to be able to comply with all of the new regulations and hire the staff that they need. So I did convey that to the Internal Finance Committee and gave them some recommendations on what other counties are paying. Ms. Reba, who you'll hear from in a minute or so, she had given through an email Nye County's plan. They had increased their compensation for their conflict attorneys. I believe it was $175. Douglas County, I know that they're paying their conflict counsel attorneys close to $195,000. So the recommendation to the Internal Finance Committee was to increase the contracts, and they supported that, and that's why we're here today. With the conflict counsel contracts, I also provided recommendations based on the information that was given to me from Ms. Reba, that during one of the conference meetings that was held, that the conflict counsel were not approved officially by the indigent defense. They had not completed the applications. So part of the recommendation to the Internal Finance Committee and to Ms. Akers, who helped draft the conflict contracts, was to put in there provisions that these conflict counsel abide and comply with the new regulations, that they put that formally into the contracts. And so that was done. And here we are.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions of staff on the conflict counsels? No? Okay, Ms. Reba, if you'd like to come up, you wrote to me indicating that you thought some areas of the contracts were not in compliance. For those members of the public, if they're interested, or what, I did put some copies on the back table if you're wishing to follow along on this particular item. Ms. Reba, please state your name for the record.
Good morning, Mayor and Supervisors. My name is Marcy Reba. I am the Executive Director of the Department of Indigent Defense Services, and it is an honor to be here today in the Bob Kroll room. I don't know if many of you knew, but before his passing, he was the chair of our board. So it is a great honor to be here. Our department, just a little bit of background, does sit underneath the board. Like I said, Mr. Kroll was the chair. There are two members from Carson City, Allison Jaffe, as well as Laura Fitzsimmons, that are on our board. We, as you've heard, our board has adopted temporary regulations, and I wrote in an email last night providing the board with those temporary regulations so that there's some understanding of where we're coming from when we're reviewing this contract. Some of the issues that we've had with the contract are the statement that in Section 5N, Roman numeral 5N, that requires that indigent defense providers pay for their own investigative expenses. We would just ask if this language could be removed from the contract. Flat fee contracts are not allowed, and the plan, as you'll hear from later, does set forth how indigent defense providers can request funding for those investigative fees. So we didn't necessarily know what these investigative fees refer to, but we think it would be appropriate to take that language out so attorneys can't be expected to pay those themselves. That would be a financial disincentive for a public defender to possibly investigate a case if it had to come out of his own pocket. The other points that we've brought up are Section Roman numeral 3 and Section Roman numeral 5, where it requires billing to be sent to the court. That's not in compliance with our temporary regulations. We have no requirement that billing needs to be sent to the court. And although it is prudent for possibly the county to keep track of billing, we would suggest that the board consider providing that billing goes to the county manager, or if there's an indigent defense services coordinator that's put in place in the plan, that could be the possible solution as to where to place that. Our concern is that under temporary regulations, section 23, indigent defense providers are supposed to have the same judicial supervision as a prosecutor or a private attorney. And prosecutors and private attorneys are not required to submit some sort of regular time summaries or some sort of monthly billing statements to the court. So those would be our recommendations.
Thank you so much. Mr. Reese or Ms. Cortez, and if you could please point me to the specific section in the contract that you're objecting to, just so that we're all following along together here. I'm seeing those in the plan, but I'm trying to understand in the contract where.
Section Roman numeral 3, subsections D.
I don't have a Roman numeral 3 in the contract, so in the backup appendix or?
Yes, these
What
are
page?
the contract amendments.
Okay, in the Exhibit A?
Yes. I would assume I don't have that in front of me.
Okay, sorry, we need to get on the same, make sure we're all talking about the same thing at the same moment in time.
It's Roman numeral 3, sections D through F, which require
Okay.
regular
So for the
time
audience
summaries.
or anyone that's listening, she's talking about Exhibit A to the contract. Okay? Mr. Reese?
Madam Mayor, to further clarify, I'm looking at packet page 207,
Number 6?
Roman numeral 3. I believe Ms. Reba mentioned D through F. I will also note that I believe Exhibit A is in the packet multiple times, so you may be on a different page.
There's 2 conflict contracts, and we have opened them both up for the same issues, same points.
Just as kind of background, the indigent defense plan for the city has been in the process of being developed. There was multiple drafts, and we've been working with DIDS on the drafts as well. The conflict Exhibit A to the Conflict Council contract was prepared very quickly. And was specifically directed to the last iteration of the indigent defense plan. So it would be appropriate to, on Ms. Marcy or Ms. Reba's objections to section 3D through F, to replace court with indigent defense coordinator, as is currently provided in the current version of the plan. I believe that would address and Ms. Reba's comments for sections 3 and sections 5, E, H, I, L, and M of the plan, or of the contract.
Changing it from court to
To indigent defense coordinator.
coordinator. Do you know indigent? Okay.
On section 5VN, section 5N, these comments were provided to us late yesterday. I haven't had a complete time to review the contract in light of this particular comment. However, this particular comment impacts the compensation and the way and other structures within the contract. And so the contract is going to need to be looked at as a whole to see how this comment can be addressed. So with that said, what I would recommend to the board is that the board, it's critical that the board enter into these contracts today so that the indigent defense services can be continued from Mr. Spence to Mr. Malone without delay. If these contracts are delayed, then there will be a period of time where a certain set of indigent persons do not have indigent representation. And I believe that is a more critical a concern than resolving this particular objection at this particular meeting. So while I will say that we will certainly look at Ms. Reba's objection and concern, and to the extent that we agree that it is an issue, we will be happy to address it. And to the extent that we need to bring that back before the board at a later time, we will do so.
Can I just confirm that we're talking about
Yes.
page 210,
Well, or where else?
N as in Nancy? I just want to make sure we're talking about
And,
the same
and
thing.
also page 200, because we have two contracts, so I
Right,
assume we're
right, yeah,
gonna-
I'm just working on the one contract for now because the language is the same. Is that what we're talking about?
I don't believe so, and so I would have to.
Because I was having a hard time finding it when she was speaking of it as well, so I don't know that I'm clear as to what we're talking about.
I would have to, I believed it was a different provision, but if I could refer it back over to Ms. Reba to clarify the objection.
I may be able to help while she's looking, just because I found it in the other one. But on page 200 of our packets, if you were to look there, the N, right at about the middle of the page, just before 6 starts, the city does not agree to reimburse contractor for expenses unless otherwise specified.
That's the one you're talking about?
Is that the N? She says VN on her document. Our indigent contractors to pay. So I guess we're all having a little bit different problem too, because you're not pointing us to the actual, so sorry, but it's helpful when we have the actual material.
1 second, Mayor.
Okay, no problem. And maybe just in general discussion, I think it's imperative that those that are requiring these services of the attorney that is leaving us, we can always come back and make an amendment to a contract as necessary to come into compliance. Lots of rules change as we go on many issues that come before the city. I'm not willing to let those clients have to have continuances on their cases and things just because we don't have, or they don't have an attorney. So I'm going to have to agree. We can always come back and fix any slight changes that are necessary. But if you have the packet number?
Yes, I do have the packet now, page 210.
210.
N, it says, the expense of office space, furniture, equipment, supplies, routine investigative costs, and secretarial services suitable. We don't understand the meaning of routine investigative costs and what's being expected, and whether or not that would create a financial disincentive for attorneys actually investigating their cases.
There is, just to clarify, in the indigent
Could I have your
defense.
name for the record, please? Thank
Yes,
you.
sorry. I'm Thomas Qualls. I'm the Deputy Director at DIDS with Ms. Reba. And there is a provision in the indigent defense plan, a budget set aside for investigation and other defense expenses, experts and whatnot, that shows that it's compliance with the regulations and the need to not have this come out of their contracts. So my suggestion would be if we could just remove that investigative expenses from that paragraph, then that piece of the contract would be in compliance and would be in line with the plan that's already been proposed.
So your indication is our plan already, I thought somewhere I was reading that there was like $1,000 and anything over that or whatever, right? So the plan does call for a, like you said, a small budget amount for it.
That $1,000 is addressed in the indigent defense plan, and I'll be happy to address that when we're addressing the plan. For the moment, I would simply reiterate my comment from earlier. This particular objection impacts the payments, the fiscal payments to the to the conflict council. So I would again recommend to approve it today so that indigent defense services are not interrupted. However, we will take it as a note to coordinate with the conflict council themselves and to discuss this item and to see what we can do to adjust it to be compliant.
Because our compensation that we set may have already included the routine investigative matters. That's why we set the rate the way we set the rate. So I think it's judicious to have a discussion to make sure the council and the city are on the same page as to what's happening, and we take note of your comment. Does anyone else have a question or anything on this? Okay. Are we ready then for a motion? Is my understanding that staff has agreed to change section 3 and 5 where the word court, we will change that to our indigent person in our plan. You got it? Okay. Supervisor Giomi?
I move to approve contract number 203-00003 and 203-00003-B with changes to section 3, D, E, and F. The word court will be stricken and indigent defense coordinator will be added. And in section, bear with me, Roman numeral 5, E as in Edward, H as in Henry, I as in Ida. Again, the word court will be stricken and indigent defense coordinator will be added.
Correct. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Jones. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried. Okay, Mr. Reese, will you take us through the plan, please? We're on item, I think it's 16. C.
Certainly.
Thank you.
What item?
This plan is Carson City's indigent defense plan. Indigent defense is generally the right to counsel guaranteed by the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. This may be more familiar to many people as the phrase often given by police officers to a person being arrested of, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. The Supreme Court of Nevada began studying indigent defense in April of 2007 through the Nevada Supreme Court's creation of the Indigent Defense Commission. The commission recognized that the rural counties, including Carson City, face different issues than Washoe and Clark counties. They created a subcommittee to study the rural counties' needs and report back to the commission. While that was happening, in October of 2018, a lawsuit called Davis versus State of Nevada was filed against the state of Nevada, alleging that certain rural counties were not providing adequate indigent defense. The counties named were Churchill, Douglas, Esmeralda, Eureka, Lander, Lincoln, Lyon, Mineral, Nye, and White Pine counties. The lawsuit did not include Carson City or Story, Pershing, Humboldt, or Elko counties. As to Carson City, the Indigent Defense Commission identified Carson City as really the gold standard among the rural counties. Carson City was already contracted with a state public defender as a first level of providing indigent defense. Carson City already contracted with conflict counsel to represent indigent persons when the state PD had a conflict, and Carson City already worked with private attorneys as a third level to provide services when the state PD and our conflict counsel was conflicted out. Carson City, as Ms. Reba mentioned, Mayor Crowell was a proponent of indigent defense. There's a rich history and tradition in Carson City of providing quality indigent defense. In fact, counsel is usually provided for indigent persons within 24 hours of a person requesting counsel. Carson City has never had a finding against it that that ineffective assistance of counsel was provided to any defendant here in Carson City. And the conflict counsel working for Carson City provide over 60 combined total of over 60 years worth of experience. In 2019, the legislature established the Nevada Department of Indigent Defense Services and the Board of Indigent Defense Services. The Nevada Department of Indigent Defense Services, otherwise known as DIDS, and as Ms. Reba mentioned, she is the executive director of the department. The Board of Indigent Defense Services has enacted temporary regulations requiring Carson City to submit a initial indigent defense plan to the Department of Indigent Defense Services. The board is currently in the process of reviewing permanent regulations. These regulations do require changing the successful manner in which Carson has historically provided indigent defense. The court staff and city staff have worked together to develop the indigent defense plan before you. We've also worked with DIDS and incorporated many of their comments. Staff has worked significant changes to the way to the plan that Carson has historically provided include the attorneys. The plan now requires attorneys providing indigent defense services to comply with the DIDS requirements, including timekeeping and case reporting requirements. As Max mentioned, the attorneys have informed us this is requiring a significant amount of time. Once the state public defenders and conflict counsel are conflicted out, private attorneys are now selected from a list of private attorneys of qualified attorneys maintained by DIDS. Reconsideration of the determination of indigency is provided for. If provided by the state of Nevada, the Carson City will provide a fund for each case, allowing indigent defense attorneys to spend funds without oversight. Requests for expenses are now directed to senior judges or judges pro tem away from the trial court. This was a recommendation made by the Nevada Supreme Court. Court documents requesting expenses for indigent defense may now be sealed. So that they are not, so that it's a matter between the court and the indigent defense attorney, and not public record available to anybody else. And the entire section 16, I believe, at the end is now new, containing many of the DIDS requirements. Many of the practices required by DIDS are new, but many of them have been historical practices in Carson City, such as requiring counsel to be present at a defendant's initial appearance, and requiring an attorney really to manage the case from beginning to end. We would agree with DIDS that that's required for competent indigent defense services. Carson City did identify a few changes to the plan from what's presented in the packet. Most of these changes are clerical changes. In Section 3 of the plan, 3D for applicability, due to moving sections around, the number, Section 2 needs to be changed to Section 3. Likewise, that's a similar requirement in subsection 16M. And in subsection 8, we recommend adding the phrase that the judges of the court will have no input regarding the selection of counsel in a particular case.
Number 8.
The J is added, yes. J is not listed in the packet provided to you in the packet materials. Yep. And that would be, J would be on page, added to page 382 of the packet materials.
So you're ignoring I?
I'm not ignoring I, I'm adding J.
There's no I. It goes
Oh.
H.
So why would it not be I? Sorry, my mic wasn't on. For the record, why would it not be I?
It is I.
Just,
If you're just adding
unless
one.
you just don't happen to like I. Maybe you have something against I. I have nothing against I.
There's no I in
hang on,
team.
hang on.
There's no I in team. That's right. Sorry, Todd.
Yes, we will make that I.
That makes me so much happier. Thank you.
Now we're tracking together. It's like, what? Okay, and then under 16 too.
And under 16, again, those are just kind of addressing clerical changes, changing section 2 to section 3 and adding subsection L as not being included in the DIDs. What the cases that DIDs covers. With that, I did note that Ms. Reba provided public comment. Madam Mayor, if you'd like me to continue on, I'm happy to address Ms. Reba's public comment, or if you'd like Ms. Reba to do that at this time.
So what I would like to do in the interest of time for all is just skip to not the areas that complied, but the areas that you had recommendations are. And I think Ms. Reba can speak for her own self on her recommendations, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the importance of looking at why these changes need to be made, we need to look at our temporary regulations that I provided to you. And one is Section 18, which is the maximum contribution formula that was created by our Board of Indigent Defense Services. So you may be wondering, what's the maximum contribution formula? Well, the board understands that making these changes may cost additional funds for the counties. And the legislature has given them the authority to create a formula to determine what the maximum amount that Carson City should pay for indigent defense services is. That formula, if you read it, is in Section 18, but basically we asked for fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19, and we took the average of that to make what Carson City's maximum contribution is. If you ask the county manager, we had some problems in finding what the number was and how much was being spent on indigent defense services, because public defenders do a lot more than indigent defense services. They do 432B cases where a child may be taken away. They do involuntary commitments where someone needs to go and maybe be committed to a mental health facility. And they may be doing other items that are outside the definition of indigent defense services. And that's why there's the importance of timekeeping. We want to ensure that the attorneys that are doing this work are doing indigent defense service work for that time. And that's why there is this specific requirement for timekeeping, because previously your contract attorneys were not keeping time. The state public defenders did submit time, but we did not have any other time to know of these contracts what portion is indigent defense services and what portion is not. So by having this timekeeping, this board will know how much is being spent on indigent defense services and how much is being spent on other items. That's beneficial because our department was actually able to apply for grant funding for reimbursement for some 432B cases because we knew the amount of time that the state public defender spends on that. So we can assist the county in that if they'd like assistance with that sort of funding. So that takes us to what are our recommendations? In addition to our temporary regulations being adopted, the law has also changed. Assembly Bill 480 was adopted by the legislature in this last session, and it makes specific changes to, in this case, what's applying is Chapter 7, 7.115, 7.135, 7.145, and 171.188. Now, what are those changes? it makes a distinction between the appointment of counsel, so a judge reviewing the application for counsel and saying, yes, they are entitled to an attorney under the Constitution, and who selects that attorney. That selection should not be done by the same entity, and it should not be done by the judiciary. So the statute was changed where that selection is either done by our department or its designee. The same is true for requests for expert and investigator funding. When an attorney needs additional funding to represent a client and investigate a case, previously they would request funding from the court. With the change in the law, that is now they would request funding from our department or its designee. The same is true for the review of billing. When attorneys submit their billing, they previously submitted it to the court, but with the change in the law, that is now done by our department and our designee. And I understand when the district attorney stated that the Supreme Court made recommendations that senior judges or judges pro tem could handle certain matters, but I'd like to point out that that was done, or that was recommended prior to the change in the law. So with this change in the law, and when you put it with our temporary regulations that public defenders should have the same judicial oversight as a prosecutor, our department is unable to designate senior judges and pro tem judges as our designee. And that's why we want to start having this conversation, because this comes into effect on October 1st. And if our department will be fulfilling this, would like to have conversations of how Carson City would like to have certain things done, how they would like us to assist in processing the billing, how they'd like us to assist in the selection of counsel. But we're also open to talking about an appropriate designee. But the recommended senior judge or judge pro tem is not an appropriate designee that we are able to allow to act in our stead. So we are making certain recommendations on the letter, and we're asking that the individual that's approving the billing, the individual that's approving these requests for funding, that they either be our department or its designee, which we need to talk about that appropriate designee for there. And we do not believe that it is senior judges or judges pro tem. The plan for hiring contractor attorneys, the regulations specifically state that although judges can comment, that cannot be the sole reasoning for their determination. And the Board on Indigent Defense Services also recommended that counties consider creating boards or committees to review the applications and make recommendations to this board as to who they should hire for these positions. The appointment of counsel, I did point out that pursuant to the regulation, it is required to be completed within 48 hours for the indigency screening. So you might wonder, what's indigency screening? I don't know what that is. Well, that's when a person's arrested, they need to be handed an application for a public defender promptly. And someone needs to go over that with them to see if they qualify. Ask them about financial information to see if they qualify likely for that public defender. And that needs to be done within 48 hours. Right now, the plan states that it can be done within 48 hours, but it also makes a distinction that it can be done within a time frame as directed by the court. We would just ask that if you have that distinction of a time frame directed by the court, that this county ensure that it's done within 48 hours. The distribution of cases, again, there's discussion in here about the selection of attorneys, and as has been commented, attorneys are required pursuant to the law to fill out an application with our department because we want to ensure that the attorneys have the education to be able to handle the complexity of a case. We don't want a brand new attorney going in on a Category A felony, a murder case, and having that be their first case. And that's happened previously, not in Carson City, but in other places. So that's the purpose of why we have this list. The plan as written allows that once that list is exhausted, that the county be allowed to go outside of the list. That is not in compliance with the regulations. It's not in compliance with the law. Attorneys have to be on our list. If counties know of attorneys that they'd like to be on our list, we encourage them to reach out to those attorneys and apply. It's a simple process, and we handle those applications as quickly as we can. At this point in time, we have over 70 attorneys on our list. Initial appearance, we are just asking that there is language in there that the attorney that's appointed or selected to represent be there to handle the initial appearance. The initial appearance is the first time you see the judge. And we just want language prepared that when that attorney's there, they're going to be ready to handle detention or bail and make an argument to the judge as to should this person be released from custody. So we want Carson City to ensure that those attorneys are talking to those individuals beforehand and prepared to make those arguments to the court. We also point out in another section where we talk about ensure resources to conduct an independent investigation and hire expert. Again, that's the discussion of would Carson City like to have an appropriate designee from our department to fulfill that role. And like we said, we're unable to approve the judiciary and judges pro tem in filling in that role because it is still the judiciary. And then finally, the prompt compensation. This is the same, the review of the billing. We would just ask to have further discussion as to who Carson City would like that designee to be. We are encouraging that they consider an attorney with knowledge in criminal law that could review these bills and make those appropriate recommendations. There's in Washoe County, Clark County, Nye County, Douglas County, Elko County, they are planning to have attorneys act in this role as the appointed council administrator, and that's what we feel is appropriate for Carson City as well, if Carson City would like that. And of course, our department would also offer its services in assisting in that area.
So may I ask, just as an understanding, you currently have 70 attorneys on your list. Can you tell me how many are within the 50-mile radius to be able to provide service to our people in need?
I can get that information for you. There are attorneys, and we've asked them to specifically state which counties they'd like to provide representation. And if you'd like, I can email you with a copy of Carson City's attorneys that have applied to be on their list.
Because I have to say what I'm concerned about. So I recognize what's trying to be accomplished. Let me start differently, right? You want to provide a good service and a fair service to those on the opposing sides, and I get all that, but I want to make sure that I'm not complicating the processes so much in which they actually languish in jail because I can't get somebody to meet other timely things. So the first issue is, to my knowledge, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Carson City has been a wonderful advocate for those in need and has provided speedy and prompt service. I just want to make that clear to everyone that's listening too. We were not sued. We're not a party to anything. We've had great services. We just got lumped in because of the size.
Thank you, Mayor. The temporary regulations apply to all of the counties. And in fact, the ADKT 411, which was referred to by the district attorney all those years ago back in 2008, it was intended for every county to enter into one of these plans. But counties other than Clark and Washoe got to stay until there was able to be assistance in building those plans. Our department feels that we are that assistance in building these plans, and that's why we've made ourselves available to Carson City to talk about this plan and to help build this and provide any information that they've requested of this. So yes, Carson City historically, the state public defender has been appearing at the initial appearances. If there's a conflict, my understanding is the appointed attorneys that are the conflict attorneys have not been appearing. So with the change in this plan, they will in the future. And I think that's possibly, I'm not involved in any of the discussions, but when I worked as a public defender in Carson City for 16 years, that was my understanding of what was going on at the time, that the public defender was there to represent their clients, but there was not attorney if it wasn't a public defender client.
And they knew at the time that the public defender wasn't going to be the attorney?
I don't know the answer to that because the court at the time was the one that would assign the cases.
Okay,
So
I just
don't
want to
know
make
the
sure, I don't
answer.
want to leave an impression that our conflict counsel aren't doing their job showing up for first appearances. I'm going to imagine that's when the public defender might have said, whoops, got a conflict, and that, anyway. I just want to make sure that we're not indicating our conflict counsels not doing a good job representing. Supervisor Giomi?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. So relative to the appointment of counsel, the hierarchy is state public defender, our conflict counsel, your DIDS list, and then your contention is beyond that, we don't have the authority to find somebody. The court does not have the authority to find somebody. So if all three of those are conflicted out, your list is exhausted, going backwards, conflict counsel is conflicted, and state public defender is conflicted. You're saying that we don't have the ability, or the court does not have the ability to appoint counsel.
Pursuant to the statute, we are required to keep a list of attorneys that are allowed to provide services, indigent defense services in the rural counties. We would work with your indigent defense coordinator if there was one that's designated. So hypothetically, if the public defender has a conflict, it also goes through those three other attorneys, and then it goes through the list of, I believe, I don't have the exact number, but I believe it's around 16 or 17 attorneys. Beyond that, if there's conflicts beyond that, we can start reaching out to neighboring counties. What attorneys are on the neighboring counties list? Douglas County, Lyon County, Washoe County. A lot of attorneys from Washoe County have applied to be on the list. Clark County have applied to be on the list. So we've sent this list out to attorneys that are practicing indigent defense services and informed them of that.
I get that. I guess I'm saying they're not on the list, right? You're saying you've sent it out and they're not on the list. My concern is we're not complying with the U.S. Constitution. I don't know that state law can usurp the Constitution. In fact, I know that it can't. So that's my concern, is that I'm not convinced the law isn't written incorrectly or doesn't give enough credence to the Constitution that requires right to counsel. So that's just my opinion. So I guess I don't agree with you on that component, that if your did list is exhausted, that the court here can't appoint somebody. I disagree with that.
And Supervisor, if I could just respond to that as well. Carson City could write their plan that at all initial appearances, the Nevada State Public Defender represents everyone, unless there's a clear conflict. And then beyond that point, if there is a conflict, then it could be appointed to different counsel. If all of those attorneys we talked about had an issue, maybe we could contact the court and say, can we move court up a day? Can we move it, in the morning instead of the afternoon? There's discussions that could be done to get attorneys there that we know are qualified and able to handle those cases.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. You say no to senior judges. Help me understand why we couldn't contract with senior judges. If we contracted directly with senior judges, it wouldn't be them assisting us as part of the judiciary. It would be them assisting us as independent contractors, as attorneys. So why would that be an issue?
Well, pursuant to NRS 480, which comes into effect on October 1st, it's our department or its designee. So whether or not this was approved as its designee would be up to our board to review. I think there'd be a lot of questions. Are these senior judges still acting as the judiciary? Because under Section 23, public defenders should have the same oversight from the judiciary as private attorneys. Do you have the district attorney have to go to senior judges to request if funds need to be spent? And the answer is no. They have a budget within their own department to be able to handle those expenses. So we are encouraging.
But they do have oversight beyond that.
Oh, yeah.
There is oversight beyond that, and that oversight beyond that is us. So that if, the prosecutor has a case that is going to cost money, there is oversight. So it almost creates the impression that you're saying that there is no oversight to the prosecutor, to the prosecution side, which is not the case. I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that's always the case.
And Supervisor Giomi, you're also the end line for indigent defense providers
Correct,
as well.
absolutely.
You enter
Both
into the
sides.
contracts, you make those decisions as well. And we are just encouraging counties, because of Section 23, to consider an appropriate designee outside the judiciary.
Supervisor Giomi,
Sir.
if I may. You're absolutely correct. Revisiting the appointment of counsel, the plan does contemplate appointment of attorneys, private attorneys within the DIDS list having offices within Carson City. If there are no attorneys available that meet that criteria, then the plan does contemplate appointing attorneys in Douglas, Lyon, Story, or Washoe counties. Outside of those counties, staff and the plan contemplates that attorneys outside of those counties are too far away to provide effective assistance of counsel to indigent defendants within Carson City. Assuming that all of those attorneys are exhausted, then the courts are required by the Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to appoint counsel for an indigent person. The options at that point would either be to appoint somebody, even if they're not qualified through DIDS, to represent the person, or to release the person and not prosecute them, or to allow them to languish in jail. Neither of the second two options are what we view to be viable options. So the plan does contemplate that the courts would make their best efforts to cooperate with DIDS and find somebody who either was qualified with DIDS or was willing to become qualified with DIDS to represent the person, but there may be a situation in which that isn't possible. And in that case, we believe that the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and the court's inherent power would allow the court to appoint somebody. As a side note on that, the court's inherent power is something that the court can exercise independently regardless of what this board or DID says. That's the court's ability to govern the cases before it. To transition very briefly, Ms. Reba also commented on appointing screening for indigency within the time frame directed by the court. This is subsection 6A2. Again, this goes to the inherent power of the court to govern the matters before it. If the court directs that another time frame is appropriate, we believe the court has the power to do that, and that simply recognizes that. That's not a power that the county has to, or that Carson City has to exercise.
Can I speak to that?
Certainly.
I just wanted to kind of give you a better understanding of the 48 hours. So currently, when someone's arrested, alternative sentencing will interview the person, give them a financial disclosure form. That person needs to provide that information coherently. They want to give that information as far as who are they taking care of in their home, who are their dependents, where are they working, how much money they have in their bank account, are they in any public assistance, and all of this information is used by the court to determine if they're indigent to provide for these services. And it's important because the 48 hours and that notation, sometimes people who are in custody, sometimes during those 48 hours, they don't have the ability to answer those questions. Majority of the time they do, but there's times when they don't. They could be having under substance abuse. They could be have some mental disabilities. And so the court, what currently happens, if that happens at the initial appearance, the court will appoint public defender in abundance of caution. Even if they don't have that information from that application, the court will appoint an attorney. They're not going to let that person not have representation. So I just want to make sure that you know that the court, that's our current practice that has worked and prevented, frankly, Carson City from being sued. So just because a form is not completed for whatever reason, the person's combative, the person's not able to do it, the court is going to appoint an attorney within that 48 hours. Thank you.
Ms.
Mayor?
Reba?
Yeah, I have a meeting at 10 o'clock. If you have additional questions for me, I can return after my meeting at 10 o'clock. It should take approximately an hour. But unfortunately, I wasn't aware of this. This meeting's been set for several months. So
You started this conversation. I suggest you stay and finish it.
I'm unable to stay. I have to go meet with the governor's finance office to discuss the maximum contribution formula. So thank you. I can be back via Zoom if you would like me to.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess my final comment, and then I'll let the others comment, which might be a moot point at this point. But I believe that DIDS has enacted temporary regulations. I don't know the process by which a state agency adopts temporary regulations, but I have to believe that the process is less open to public comment than final regulations. So in my belief that we should go forward with this plan, submit it to the board after final regulations are adopted. I would encourage the courts and the DA's office to provide comments on those final regulations that you, as experts in the area, deem appropriate. And I think we should adopt the plan, let their board look at the plan, and then work with the board, talking the Indigent Defense Board, who ultimately has to approve our plan, right? It's the Indigent Defense Board that has to approve the plan, not the executive director, correct?
Correct, Supervisor Giomi. The Board of Indigent Defense has issued a public notice that it will be considering public comment for its permanent regulations on October 6th. Staff was planning to provide comment to the board, and with your direction, we'll do so. On the difference between temporary and permanent regulations, I would defer to board counsel, who has much more experience in that matter than I do. But yes, I do believe that temporary regulations go through a less rigorous process than permanent regulations do. If I may, Supervisor Giomi and Madam
Let me just
Mayor.
finish one comment, and then I'll be done. I guess I'll just wrap up by saying I think I don't think we want to be uncooperative, but I think there's enough questions between what DID's staff beliefs are and what our legal advice is, that this should go forward under permanent regulations, not temporary regulations, and a full review by their board, not just a review by staff. I think those things are critical. And I think if we do that and we make adjustments to this based on that discussion and those regulations, that we're gonna serve our indigent folks much better than we would making all those changes. Thanks.
Thank you. Supervisor Jones?
I don't know. There's been a lot of things brought up today. It seems to me like we're layering some areas, like creating another board to present their findings to a board. I'm really not prepared to make a decision today on this. I think I don't know. I'm just not comfortable with it.
Thank you. Supervisor White?
Thank you. Did we not see this at our last meeting and we put it off already?
You're correct, Supervisor White. At the last meeting, we did this was placed on the agenda for the last meeting. DIDS, in the interim, provided comment. Based on their comments, it was pulled from the agenda, and some of the comments were addressed in the plan to try and make it more compliant with the DIDS plan, or with the DIDS regulations.
Right.
So the whole point of these last three items is to see that indigent folks are afforded their civil rights with a speedy trial. And yet, yesterday at 3:45, an email lands in my box. Actually, it's 3:56. I don't see this 40-page email until 7 o'clock at night. That lady comes in here and drops a bomb today and then runs out the door. I cannot think of a situation that aggravates me more than that kind of arrogance. For me, I intend to give you as wide a latitude as you need to see that our indigents are taken care of. As Supervisor Giomi said, we don't want to appear uncooperative, but you go do what you need to do, and we'll take care of that nonsense later.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do, just for the record, if we may. So Ms. Reba did send specific recommendations, and I'd like to, on the record, just have a dialogue of why we either like her recommendation or we don't want to implement her recommendation, and we'll go to the board, like you said, to the indigent board, and let them make the call for us. So the first thing was dealing with the use of a senior judge or a judge pro tem. So that I may understand this, we could do a contract specifically with a judge that is no longer has active cases, but he was a judge for us in the past. So we could contract with them. So they're very aware of practices and billings and timesheets and what's appropriate to bring before. Why would that not be acceptable? Why should we continue that practice or not continue that practice?
Madam Mayor, I believe that approach would be acceptable. As mentioned, the Supreme Court approved the use of a judge other than the trial judge. DIDS, as Ms. Reba mentioned, DIDS has taken this one step further, requiring the removal of the judiciary from the process. If the city were to contract with a senior judge directly, that would remove the judiciary from the process. Now, the reason why DIDS is asking to remove the judiciary is it's trying to provide that indigent defense providers are treated similar without oversight as a prosecutor. The difference between that is that currently a prosecutor receives his funds from the board and then the prosecutor has to manage those funds. This is the DA and the DA's office. If the DA wants more funds, he can come back to this board, and this board can tell him, no, go fly a kite, or whatever language the board wishes to use. By contrast, indigent defense, the way it's currently provided, is that the indigent defense attorneys are appointed. Those attorneys have to request from the courts their expenses and their compensation, except if we've otherwise entered into a contract with them. And the courts approve that based on the expense being reasonable and necessary for the representation of the indigent person. That is the check and balance on that process. Once approved by the courts, state law says that this board does not have the authority to deny those claims and must pay them. So by removing the judiciary from that process and assuming that DIDS was doing that, making those decisions, Ms. Reba now has the state public defender under her who is requesting the expenses, and she is now approving the expenses. So basically, she is both requesting and approving the expenses herself, which presents a conflict of interest and an ethical problem for the Department of Indigent Defense. Now, what she's advocating for is that if she approves it, then it would simply be paid by the county. That's essentially an unfunded mandate, an open check to the county's treasury to spend whatever they want. So that's why we are trying to put in place, or the plan tries to put in place, an independent body. And if it can't be, if the DIDS boards believes that it can't be the judiciary and that's upheld, then I believe that contracting with senior judges or other similar persons would be a viable option that would remove that from the judiciary.
Thank you. So I think it would be prudent for us then to take these items specifically. I am currently in support of the way this section then is written in the plan. I think that it's proper and appropriate, and everything has checks and balances. I think in government, that's the most important thing you can have, is a check and balance system. I think we should submit this and see what the board rules on this. Anybody want us to make a change in this section, or are we all in concurrence to move forward with this section? Move forward? Move forward? Okay, then let's go on to the next section that Ms. Reba had a recommendation. She talked about recommending that we create a selection committee. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm personally not seeing the need to create another layer of boards to be able to give us a recommendation. Specifically, the attorneys are already submitting to them to get on the list. To me, that means if that's what I'm accepting before this group here to do contracts, they're already been vetted and on a list. So I'm not understanding the need for another layer. Am I missing any step in that you would see the need to create another board?
No, Madam Mayor. This request to create an independent board is a recommendation from the DIDS board. There is no law of which I am aware of that requires us to create such a board. And as the mayor pointed out, selection of conflict counsel would be required to be qualified by by DIDS prior to appointment by this board, and this board is independent from the judiciary.
Right. So is everybody okay leaving it the way then in our plan? Okay, let's move on to her next recommendation. Dealt with ensuring the screening component conducted by alternative sheriff's office within 48 hours or sooner as required or within the time frame directed by the court. It is unclear what time frame directed by the court, but I think you've already on the record indicate we do everything within 48 hours unless there's a hiccup
And
in the actual case, as Mr. Giomi went through. We get through and we're conflicted out everywhere. So then the court it may be one more day to get something done.
Is she actually contending that the court does not have the authority to extend the 48 hours? I mean, essentially, it's what I heard her say. She's saying state law mandates 48 hours, irrespective of any condition that may arise that would prohibit that from happening. Someone's in detox, someone refuses to answer the question, someone is combative, et cetera, et cetera. She's saying there is no provision except to fill that document out within 48 hours.
This will be a very attorney answer. I'm not entirely sure what she's advocating, but I do agree that, as Max explained, there may be circumstances where the 48 hours becomes problematic for circumstances beyond the city's control. In that case, the court does have the inherent power to manage the process, and this is directed to the court's inherent power to issue an order otherwise.
I mean, would different language perhaps say that if the form is unable to be completed within 48 hours, that the court will assign indigent counsel? I mean, is that potential language to stick in our plan that might satisfy the law? I mean, otherwise it just seems ridiculous to me that
I believe that the court it certainly has the obligation to, and the court has the obligation to do it quickly.
Under the Sixth Amendment.
Yeah,
So-
under the
so
Sixth
really,
Amendment.
yeah, do we have to? Yeah, okay, I got you.
I'm not sure there's benefit to be gained.
It's already there. I get it.
Right. Supervisor White?
Madam Mayor, in the financial interest of the city, might we put this on pause for a moment and take up the matter of the airport contract so we can get Mr. Takis back to work and off the clock?
I think we're just down to 2 items left for discussion on this one, and unless I'm catching a beat wrong here, if it's going to proceed too long, I will be happy to accommodate that, but I think, so I'm getting the feeling, again, on number 3, we're comfortable. Okay, so no change for that. Lease conditions in accordance, pending determination. I didn't hear that we had any issues with that. And so our last one was her number, and she said we complied, but she had a recommendation, so I'm not quite sure. On number 8, since she marked that it complied, she still had a little bit of a recommendation, but I'll take compliance every day of the week.
If I may, Madam Mayor, that number 8 was caught up in the senior judge issue, and I believe that issue has been discussed on the record.
Right. So taking that, unless I'm missing a beat, I will accept a motion with the changes discussed on the record, but the J will become an I instead. So Supervisor Giomi?
I move to approve the Indigent Defense Services Plan as presented with changes to section 3D as in David, 8I as in India, and 16M as in Michael, as presented on the record by the District Attorney's Office. And further, to direct the staff to provide input relative to formal regulations that the board will be considering.
I second.
Indigent board, thank you.
Is there any
Second
discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. 4 yeses and 1 no. Supervisor Jones. And his was based on needing a little more information. Okay, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you. We're all going to come back to, let me ask, because I have the Secretary for Elections here, and I have a really quick item. Is there any issue for you time-wise if I take the airport? It's a really quick item first.
Entirely to you, Mayor.
You're good? Thank you. With that, then we're going to take item 16B. That is being billed by the hour, so. And we've been talking about attorneys all morning, so let's try and help the airport authority out here. We're going to move on to item 16B, which deals with the no-cost renewal for our cooperative extension for the airport authority. I'm going to just start off with, you can make opening comments, but you don't have to.
Okay.
Is there any questions that anybody from the board had on our contract? Seeing none, I think you would be, oh, there is one? Oh, I'm sorry, Supervisor White, I missed the,
So
I looked away.
Considering that our last item was scheduled for 15 minutes, and I'm certain that's how Mr. Takis scheduled his day, perhaps Mr. Takis could bill the DID board for the last hour that has been wasted on his time.
Thank you.
I don't think I'm on their list, so I probably don't get paid.
So, Mr. Takis, just for the
Yeah.
record, if you would indicate you are satisfied with the contract.
Yeah, I did want to make one note. You know, we worked through this. I worked through this with the DA's office, who was great. They came up with the first draft, which is a great basis for us to work forward. We currently are still showing the fire station that's right next to the airport within the description of parcels that include the airport. We've never shown the fire station as part of the airport. In fact, all the maps we file with the FAA show that the fire station is outside of the airport. But I'm working right now with Robert Nellis in your city staff to try and figure out a way, how do we break that out so that it's clear? And that's important because at some point, it's important because we don't want to be, the airport doesn't want to be responsible for the fire station, and it doesn't make any sense for us to. We love having it right next to the airport because it provides us with tremendous service, but it's really something we can clean up. But it does not require any change to this agreement. I just wanted to give you a heads up on that because the DA's office and I have been discussing that. I don't have anything additional, so if you're okay with approving it, we look forward to a continued cooperative relationship between the airport and the city. It's been good for 30 years or whatever it is, 25 years, I don't know, since
Thank you.
1989. It's been great.
Supervisor Jones, would you like to make the motion?
Yes. I move to approve the renewal agreement as presented.
I have a motion and a second for approval of the agreement. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Were you an aye? Oh, you're not colored up. Okay. I'm going to take them as a yes. That was a unanimous. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. You guys
And maybe
take
you
care.
just want to be benevolent today and not bill them at all. Anyway, have a great day. Okay, I'll go for that. We're going to move on to agenda item 16A, which is discussion and presentation by Mark Walshin of the Secretary of State's office. Thank you so much. And thank you for allowing the last item to go first.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. Anything to benefit the taxpayers, understand. Okay, good morning, Mayor, ladies and gentlemen. Mark Voloshin, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections for the record. I'm here today on behalf of Secretary of State Barbara Sagaski in order to discuss the plan for our voter outreach campaign and to ask for your assistance. In close coordination with your county clerk, and in addition to her local voter outreach campaign, I intend to spend significant portions of the next 18 to 24 months providing facts to groups of current or future voters. Among the many lessons learned from the 2020 election cycle, we identified the very clear need to spend more time talking with voters about how our elections are conducted and administered at the state and local level. The specific procedural and technical details, something that had not previously been of interest to many voters, are now being discussed at dinner tables, association meetings, and on social media across the state. Unfortunately, many of those discussions include everything from deliberate falsehoods to simple misunderstandings about the federal and state laws to which we maintain strict compliance. That alone has led to significant confusion. But adding to this confusion, the 2021 legislative session created a number of changes to how our elections will be conducted during future election cycles. These changes include different timelines for ballot submission and signature curing, new options for specific classifications of voters, and others that will further complicate voter understanding of an already complex process. While I have an acute understanding of our state's election laws, I do not have as keen an awareness of your constituents, their concerns and questions, or how to best contact them. Therefore, in order to maximize the effectiveness of this voter outreach campaign, I ask that through your county clerk, you direct me towards those advocacy groups, community leaders, and others who could benefit from a discussion about our elections. The conversations can be in person when possible or via Zoom, and there's no limit to how many we can schedule or a deadline by which we must be complete. Of course, I will try to talk to as many people as possible before the 2022 general election on November 8th of next year, but I recognize that these conversations will need to continue well into 2023 and 2024. Of note, I will ask to schedule a similar meeting such as this with our statewide elected officials, your county school board, and many other boards and advocacy groups across the state. I would also like to schedule an additional in-person meeting with this board so I'm able to discuss these same items and can answer any questions that you have. Our electoral process is intricate, but our voters deserve to hear from a trusted source about how it works, what Aubrey and her team do to comply with federal and state laws, and why I am firm in my belief that our process is secure. With that being said, I'm available for your questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Supervisor White?
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. Hey, you know, I interact with the constituents quite a bit, and I hear some very substantial angst about the mail-in portion of this deal. I get a lot of questions about how a voter can opt out of mail-in. So if you could explain that to us briefly and kind of give a rundown what a voter has to do to opt out of mail-in voting.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. The opt-out process is defined in Assembly Bill 321, was one of the first things that Secretary Sagaski directed our team to work out. We've been in close coordination with the clerks about it, but the bottom line, and to answer your question very directly, we now have a form that has to be filled out and provided to the county clerk, and that form will identify that that voter does not want a ballot to be mailed to them. That will enable them to vote in person and not worry about a ballot showing up to their house in the mail stream. It is important to note that folks that want to opt out of a mail ballot need to do so before 60 days before the next election. So while we still have some time, it's important to not wait to the last moment. Additionally, in addition to this, the form that we've developed already, we're currently working on a process very similar to the previously done absentee ballot request process where it can be done online. That is not yet implemented though, but will be an important part of our outreach as well.
So they can get the form online and then mail it in?
Or deliver it in person. Yes, sir. Irony is noted. Thank you.
Is there any
Thank
further-
you very much. I appreciate your patience.
Is there any further questions? No? Please thank your boss so much for having you come and again, getting in a public forum to be able to let people know what they can work on. And do you want to leave some contact information, maybe your contact number or something on the back table? So if there's anyone in the audience or that's listening, we could get a direct contact for them to get some answers?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am, I
I
will.
think that would be super good for our residents to know where they can go to get help. So thank you
Absolutely.
so
Excellent
much.
idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add, and sorry, I didn't have a question, but I really appreciate this. I know that there are questions that the community members have and perhaps some misunderstandings or concerns. And so the fact that you're reaching out to say you're willing and able to meet with concerned members of our community to really explain the process, to answer questions, that is just wonderful. So thank you very much.
And then, Mr. Walsh, and there might be a couple in the audience right now that would like to talk to you. So if you have some time, he might be willing to have a conversation. I can see 2 or 3 in the audience that care deeply about this subject. So thank you so much, and I'd appreciate if you could work with them.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. There's no comment. So I'm asking each of you if we can please pull item 16B once again. Sorry for that, but the attorney did indicate, Mr. Takis, that they are working on an APN correction to a parcel split or something like that. I'd like to move for reconsideration of the motion. If we could please add that the city manager and the district attorney can make the clerical change to the contract to denote the APN for the fire station. So they don't have to bring us back the contract just to fix the APN number. Does anybody have a problem letting them correct the APN? Is that Supervisor Jones, you're agreeable to adding on to the motion that the city manager to work with the district attorney's office to make the clerical change to identify the revised APN number. Is the second acceptable with that?
Yes.
Okay, we'll re-vote on the motion then. All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Thank you very much for that slight correction to that. It's just more efficient to let them fix the APN number. With that, it's 10:15. We're going to take a recess until 10:30 so that if those want to catch him, and then we will come back up with 17A when we come back on. Thank you.
is going that way. It's actually.
They need another.
And then make a left and go back to the top.
We got too many bulls.
Are you guys ready? Miss Warren, are you ready for the recording again? Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to call the Board of Supervisors back to order. We are on agenda item 17A. Let me make a quick check just to make sure all that moving around. I didn't miss an item. I think so, but let me double check. Okay, we're on item 17A, which is discussion and possible action regarding a determination that RMAP Construction is the lowest responsible bidder, dealing with our Kings Canyon trailhead. Mr. Wentworth, would you like to come up to discuss the options and the project, please? And Lindsay. Morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, board members. Lindsay and I think can collectively answer your questions. I have a little bit more knowledge of the project itself, and she has more as far as the funding is concerned.
Okay.
So I believe the question was why we won't be selecting either of the ad alternate items from the bids.
Well, maybe if you could just start with what is included in the base bid that you're recommending versus what's in the ad alternates that you are not recommending.
Sure. The base bid for the Kings Canyon Road project will include reconstructing the ditch for everything above, let's start, where the new trailhead at the top of the asphalt will be built. The first half mile is not included. That is one of the ad alternates. From a half mile in to the top of the project, the base bid would include reconstructing the entire ditch, some new ditch, some ditch repair, section 1,900 linear feet of roadway reconstruction, 4 drivable dips, which are just elongated dips through the road to move the water where we want it. Some culverts and some riprap. This will address the worst parts of the road. The worst part is part of the roadway reconstruction and all the significant damage that gets us to the point where we want to be, which is to provide emergency access to that point we've designated at the top. Add alternate 1, the 2655 linear feet of ditch reconstruction would be the bottom half mile, which a significant portion of that is actually being affected by the current project, which is building the trailhead at the top of Kings Canyon Road. Because these plans were designed by the Forest Service prior to the Public Works project it's not Public Works, Federal Highway, portion of the paved portion of Kings Canyon. There's a single sign, which staff is more than capable of installing at a later time. And then add alternate item 2 includes 2 slope failures, which Ms. Boyer and I have personally been up to visit and look at compared to the plans. They're fairly minor. A full-size truck can still pass through there at this time. Our thoughts are that once the project is complete, it would be totally achievable for 2 staff members with a backhoe to go up and fix those eroded areas. The current project that's happening right now has already staged some extra rock, large boulders down to, large riprap. And this project will also create some excessive or excess material where they're reconstructing the road that we're not intending to haul off site. So there will be a surplus of large rock on site that city staff can use, and we're estimating maybe in 1 day's time for 2 employees to go up and fix what was bid at, I believe it was 8,000 and something for add alternate 2, somewhere in that neighborhood. We just don't see that as a priority, that we can easily take care of those issues at a later time with staff.
And the other issue on this is the ownership of the property itself. And so we're not looking to utilize general fund or quality of life dollars on property we don't own. But you also have the corresponding project that we're doing that I think we got a flap grant for. And so we can coordinate all of that to make it the best it can be with the dollars.
Yes, exactly. We don't want to spend parks money or city tax dollars to make expensive repairs to a U.S. Forest Service road and land that we can easily accomplish
With
after the fact.
leftovers potentially from the other. That's good use so that we don't have any waste from one project to another either. So that's good. Is there any questions that any member of the board has? No? Okay. Do we want a motion? Supervisor Schutte?
I move to award the contract for the base bid only for a not-to-exceed amount of $133,377.48, which includes a 10% contingency, and to adopt the contract as presented.
Do I have a motion and a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Supervisor Giomi? Okay, thank you so very much, but I'm not sure. Are you going to sit right there? I don't think there'll be any questions, but we're going to move on to item 18A, which is the possible adoption for 6 property names in open space. Does anybody have any questions about them or comment?
I have a comment.
Supervisor Schutte?
Yes, I have a comment. First of all, I appreciate and thank the open space team and the advisory committee for really some great discussion and being very mindful of historical significance, donors, use. And so it was really, really well thought out. And in approving and whatever is decided, I would like to piggyback on some of the conversations from Open Space Committee in terms of having like an interpretive panel or kiosk or something that really talks about some of the meanings behind these names and the stories behind the donations, that kind of thing. I just really think it's another great way for our community and our open space to really come together in an interpretive and positive way. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? If none, Supervisor Schutte, do you want the honor of the motion?
Sure, thank you. I move to designate the 6 open space properties with the recommended names as described on the record.
I have a motion and a second for approval of the names. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion is unanimous. And again, please pass on our thank you to all the great work that the Open Space Committee did with this selection, and staff, I'm sure. So thank you very much. Okay. We are going to move on to agenda item 19A, discussion and possible action regarding our proposed resolution and adoption of our hazard mitigation plan. Mr. Dannon, are you going to be the primary on this one? And is our issue already resolved across the street? The first hazard? I'm like, absolutely, your pleasure, to put this together for us. Thank you.
So for the record, Jason Danon, Battalion Chief, Deputy Emergency Manager here in Carson City. So we've been working on the hazard mitigation plan. Just a reminder of what that is. It's a plan that's required by FEMA to be updated every 5 years. The last one we did was in 2016. This has been about a year-long process that we've been working on to update and revise. I say update, but basically we rebuilt the whole plan. It was a tremendous workload by a lot of people in a very small amount of time. Most of the people here behind me and in front of me were involved in this process. Thank you for very much. So we were able to contract with R.O. Anderson. R.O. Anderson did the heavy lifting on this. They have a presentation, and with time constraints, if we want to bypass that presentation, we can do that. But if you guys like to see what we did, it's kind of a show and tell of the scope of the project.
I think it's important for the public to understand we don't just take our plans and put them on the shelf. I mean, right? So please do. Well, and that we take it serious, right? The protection of the public and your asset, your homes, your garages, your everything is important to us. So
Can I just make a quick comment?
absolutely.
And just, the importance of this hazard mitigation plan, I think our board realizes, but for the audience, is that this makes us, as a local government, eligible for disaster mitigation funds, for pre-disaster mitigation funds, which means we can get funds to mitigate high flood zones, fire management assistant grants, so that if we do have a large wildland fire, we can get assistance there. So none of that happens. No disaster funds happen without a hazard mitigation plan. So just wanted to set the stage for you. Hope I didn't take your thunder there, Chief.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth and Kate.
You please identify yourself for the record and go for it.
Kate Cunningham with R.O. Anderson Engineering. I'm going to just kick it off for the first few slides. I don't know if you can show the whole screen or... Is that better? Okay, great. So we are presenting to you today just some highlights, a condensed version of a very large document. You can see the appendices there, and we also have another. And so this first slide is just kind of giving you a sense of how much there is to the project. So if you go to slide 2, we'll just move. Oh, I did want to say some things, though. Sorry. Mayor Bagwell and to the Board of Supervisors, we're really focused on you today. And I really welcome this opportunity to talk with you about the plan, because as the governing body for the city and the leaders of the city, you have a significant role throughout the life of the plan. And much of the implementation and development of the plan relies on your input. So we hope this presentation supports and expands your vision of your role in hazard mitigation planning and implementation. That's okay. So thank you. So the next slide is an overview of the hazard mitigation plan update process. And we have 5 categories for this section. We get organized, we assess risk, we assess capability, and in these 5 steps, which are listed here, we're going to dive into them a little more deeply through the following slides. Because each step has many components, and we will try to address each step in a little more detail so you have an overall review of what you'll find in the plan and the process we use to develop it. So the next slide. So the first step is to get organized. We do ask for the city or whatever the entity is to provide us with any documents that they have about hazardous events, planning they've done over time, any existing plans and studies that we can integrate in the plan. And so that's one of the first steps. But one of the fundamental core of the plan is the team that works on it. So we identified a planning team that started with the Local Emergency Planning Committee. The LEPC committee was the core for the team. And then we added to that team invitations to Carson City experts as recommended by the city. We invited outside experts, including subject matter experts, as well as regional partners and other stakeholders, and we invited the public. So the plan is an involvement of the community as a whole and many individuals in it. And so it's not on the slide here, but public outreach really starts with this first step. And in this case, we had a press release go out with much help from Rachel Schneider, the communication relations coordinator, who helped us throughout the plan to get information out. And it's very fundamental to the plan. It's required by FEMA, in fact, that we have involvement. So finally, there's one other feature of the plan that we wanted to cover here, and that is that you can have a single jurisdictional plan, which is what we did, or a multi-jurisdictional plan. And after we kind of got started with it, we learned that the airport and the school district could qualify as separate jurisdictions, and a future plan could be a multi-jurisdictional plan. So we wanted to bring that up to you now so that you could have that in mind for a future update. Right now, for this particular plan, we had a very tight timeline, so we couldn't add 2 annexes to adequately evaluate those jurisdictions. So the next slide is on the topic of the assets to assess risk and vulnerability. So risk is the chance of damage or loss, and the evaluation is the potential damage to population, infrastructure, and structures. The process starts by identifying the hazards, and we did go through a process for that, and you'll get a little more information on that in future slides. We profile them in 8 categories and analyze their impacts. And we review any documented impacts that we can find, either from the city's notes, from collected data, or from outside sources. So then vulnerability assessment takes that data and evaluates what the weaknesses might be that could impact population and structures going forward. So now I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Kate. So,
Would you state your name for the record? I am so sorry, but
That's
she can't
okay.
do the minutes. Thank you so much.
For the record, Elizabeth Ashby.
Thank you.
So one important informational point that I'd like to bring to your attention is that hazard mitigation planning takes at least 1 year. And thanks to Carson City staff, Public Works, GIS, Emergency Management, we managed to get this completed within 3 months, which is, yay, a really good effort. FEMA has reviewed the plan and approved it. We're here to request your adoption and approval of that plan. So I think Kate already stated that we didn't identify, your planning team identified the hazards. And we ranked them in order to prioritize what is more important, obviously, for Carson City to reduce the risk for. Next slide, please. After we prioritized the hazards, GIS developed maps of the hazards. Whenever there is data available for the hazards, those are created into maps. And then thank you. Next slide. And once the map is created, we work on identifying assets. Okay, so what are your structures, your infrastructure, and we include population as an asset. Okay. GIS overlays, maps those assets and overlays the map of the hazard on top of the assets. And that determines potential losses for the city. Okay, so that's...
May I have a question on this particular slide? Do you want the questions on the individual slide?
Yes,
or
please.
Okay.
Yes.
So can you talk to me, just for the public's edification also, when I look at vacant total, I was surprised to learn, and so I think it's important, that it included roads in the vacant. Did I understand that? So it's vacant single-family homes, vacant multi... So to try and understand the content value when they're vacant. But is that because there was destruction of roads within that number?
No, we used the assessor's land use codes. So vacant residential, commercial, industrial structures or
It's just-
APNs.
It's actually just land. It's
land.
just land. So vacant is just land. It's a land use total in the assessor's database, and it's just vacant land. And vacant land does have a value, obviously.
Yeah, but
we
what's
tax
the
on that
content value? I guess I'm misunderstanding.
Well, I don't know what the
Oh,
content value is.
So
I'm not understanding. So help
thank
me,
you.
please.
So we did across the board a 50% of the value of the asset is a content value. We don't know whether there is a structure or if it's vacant land. We just used the FEMA 50% rule and added that to the value of the property.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you for the clarification. I'm just trying to understand how if it's vacant
They probably should
land,
have.
there's nothing.
Yeah, They
it's
probably should have
vacant.
left the content value off, but
Right.
it was probably a formula that they just had in.
We
Okay,
did,
'cause I'm like,
exactly.
I'm not getting it. I want you to know I actually read it all, so I'm like,
Oh
I
my
need an
goodness. Thank
understanding
you.
as
I've worked
to-
with Elizabeth for years, and so I think I know her secrets, so.
She followed the formula that
Followed
was
the
given to
formula
her.
too well,
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that is what it is. It's just an additional
formula.
50% of the value
Okay.
of whatever the asset is. Okay? So that's how we determine. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a big amendment reminder there. We wanted to talk about an amendment. So the values here will be modified. We did not have time to rerun the HASIS or FEMA software with additional local data. We ran just the default values. So we are going to go ahead and enter local data, which will modify all these values to your advantage probably. So, it'll be a better figure about your losses, your potential losses.
So
Okay?
in our motion, you want us to allow for the update to the values pursuant to new FEMA?
It isn't necessary. It isn't necessary. FEMA has already reviewed these values and it has approved them. The amendment is purely to meet the request for proposal requirements to rerun the HASIS software. Yeah, thank you. So it isn't necessary. The amendment will only need to be approved by the planning team. They're the only ones that need to go ahead and review the changes. You're welcome to review them. It's not necessary. Okay. Any other questions on this slide?
Oh, no.
Okay. Thank you. So we talked about, next slide, please. We talked about hazards, having information for hazard mapping, right? So we have data for mapping floods, for mapping fire, and hazardous materials. But how do you map severe weather? How do you know where it strikes, right? And then if you don't know, how do you know what's at stake? What are your potential losses? Well, do we decide a percentage of the value of the structures? Well, we did find a proven method. Washoe County had previously, based on expertise, determined that during severe weather events, about 5% of the structure, the outside of the structure, or maybe even the landscaping would be damaged. So we took their 5% and applied it to the Carson City plan. And so when there is no data about hazards, we use that 5% to calculate losses. Okay. Next slide, please. And Kate is going to talk to us about a sample for vulnerability losses and also capabilities for the city.
So this slide is an example of the application of the 5% to assets and exposure. And I will also mention that we calculated impacts on the population itself as 5%, just in the terms of potential lost time due to road close, that kind of thing. So different impacts on the population are also acknowledged in other parts of the plan. So it's the calculated potential vulnerability for this one hazard. and it uses the 5% exposure. Next slide is assess capabilities. Sorry, I have trouble with that today. So when we assess capabilities, we ask the question, what resources does the city have in place that can be leveraged to support hazard mitigation planning? So FEMA requires that each of these categories be analyzed in terms of capabilities. So the first one is National Flood Insurance Program and the community rating system. And this is just a hats off to the city part. You have a great program and a very good score, and we'll talk about that in another slide. Another category that had to be analyzed was your administrative and technical capabilities, and we spoke with different people in different departments in the city who provided some information on that, because we needed to see what kind of expertise you have in-house. And then education and outreach to bring the community together and how that goes on, and clearly your very capable coordinator of community outreach is doing a great job, and she was a big help. And then financial opportunities. Do you have, what kind of internal and external sources do you have for opportunities for matching funds or leverage? But then the category of planning and regulation is a little more complicated. We really need to see some integration of planning and regulation into the plan and vice versa. So there's a few steps to this. So first of all is what plans, regulations, and policies do you have in place? And then how do these plans, regulations, and policies incorporate mitigation? And then vice versa, how are the plans, regulations, and policies incorporated into mitigation strategies? So here's a key strategy for this. We think the Board of Supervisors is a key strategy for this, because what goes across your desk is all these different things that one person worked on over here and another person worked on over there, but you're the place where the warp and the woof can come together and weave in these connections between mitigation strategies and plans. So you're in the position to identify opportunities to connect hazard mitigation to other plans, like the strategic plan, which I think is a little bit connected to hazard mitigation planning, thanks to the board. So in the next slide, we talk a little more about the National Flood Insurance Program. Carson City is more resilient than it was 20 years ago. It's pretty impressive when you compare the maps. There's a decrease in the area of the floodplain, and this decrease, I believe, has earned a 20% cost reduction of flood insurance for homeowners. The city's rating is a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, with the lower score being better, but apparently it's unusual to have a rating of 6, so you're doing a great job. The rating helps determine the cost of the reduction of flood insurance for your residents. So in the next slide, I'll give you a little tip on how to continue with that. So anytime, if you get an annual presentation on the status of hazard mitigation planning annually, you get points toward your community rating system goal, and you can increase your reduction through that, and also have an opportunity to be reminded and consider what hazards have we experienced in the last year. And lately, it's been pretty easy to come up with some. So this would just have two benefits: to continue to improve your rating and to keep you in the loop and an annual basis on how things are going. So just, I'm back to Elizabeth.
Boy. So after we did that capability assessment, and we know where our hazards are, and we know what our vulnerability is, the planning team came up with 11 goals. So here are your 11 goals. Of these 11 goals, next slide, please. There were 60 action items created. All of the goals are addressed in the action items, and they cover all of the risks, all of the hazards, that were identified. So the table it looks complicated, but basically is telling you what the goal is, what the action item is, who's responsible for it, where you can find money, and whether it's ongoing or static. The priority, the group took a whole day working on prioritizing the 60 mitigation actions, so to keep Carson City safe and its population safe. Next slide, please.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Supervisor White?
I didn't find climate change in any of the goals.
It is addressed in goal number 1 and 2, which are general goals. Those two goals encompass all hazards. So it is covered in goals 1 and 2. Thank you for the question. Okay, so one important requirement from FEMA in hazard mitigation planning is plan maintenance to keep the plan alive during the 5-year lifespan of the plan. So we provided some tools. The schedule is an example of when the planning team should meet and when they should be reporting to you, the Board of Supervisors, on the status of the plan. Next slide, please. We also, basically maintenance is gathering data. Okay, the gathering of the data that will support the next update, the future update of the plan. So there's a lot of forms involved in gathering data. So we provided those forms basically. So forms that the planning team can go and track continued public involvement and track when hazard events occur, what are the costs, where did they impact, how many homes were impacted or public land or whatever was impacted, they can track with those forms. And the last one, which is shown in the slide, is to track progress on those mitigation actions, right? How many have we implemented? How many have started or not started? Why haven't we started? There's a form for that as well. So it's full of forms.
That's government.
Right, it's full of forms, but there's nothing like historical knowledge, right? Staff knowing what happened, when it happened, and being able to access the data of those events. Next slide, please. So with that, we talked about the hazard mitigation plan, hazards and vulnerability, and the strategy that was created to reduce the risk and keep Carson City safe. You all have an electronic version. Thank you, and we look forward to your adoption.
Does any member of the board have a question? Supervisor White?
I have several, so if you'll just be patient. If I could take you to section 5, page 23. In the third line there, it states, species ranges will shift in some local extensions due to climate change. Can you tell me what species you're expecting to go extinct?
I think that would require a study of the current, a base study to find out what the current species are.
So this is just a basic comment from where?
Climate change is an issue that has been taken up by the governor, and they've created a list of potential impacts to Nevada, and that's where the data is taken from.
So the governor says this?
No, it's a team that he created. It's a board that he created of experts that have done the studies.
Section 5, page 49, at utility loss, talking about earthquakes. The sentence says, the pipeline is constructed of high-grade steel using modern full penetration welding techniques. What pipeline? It doesn't. This paragraph doesn't identify what pipeline you're talking about.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. We will check on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the next paragraph, again, still with earthquakes, the paragraph is about tank damage, and it says, once contained within the dikes, the petroleum products can be kept from ignition sources, and the spill can be controlled. What tanks are you talking about? You haven't identified, really what the source of your concern is here.
Thank you again. We will address that.
Section 5, page 57. In utility loss, again, the second paragraph, again, you're talking about a pipeline,
Pipeline.
but you
yeah.
don't identify what the pipeline is. The last line is, it's imperative, in the event of a spill, an assessment of the location is made to determine whether it is in drainage. What kind of pipeline would we have that would drain into a drainage? I know we have a water pipeline from Mendon. What are we talking about here?
Okay, we could be talking about just utility pipelines, but again, thank you for bringing it to our attention. We will make sure that we address that issue.
Section 5, page 117, talking about source of our water. I think Mr. Schultz is prepared to give some clarification on this.
Yes, good morning, Darren Schultz, Public Works Director, for the record. So on section 5, 117, there's a couple of clarifications and edits that we could make on the record. The first full paragraph there on that page starts with because. It reads, because the majority of Carson City's water is obtained from surface water from Ash and Kings Canyon. And what that should say is because the majority of Carson City's surface water is obtained from Ash and King. So the surface is inserted in the wrong part of the sentence. And then the next paragraph starts with Carson City's primary source of water is surface water. And to clarify that, we do conjunctive use, so we use water both from the surface and underground. So some years, when it's wet years, our primary source of water is in fact surface water. And then the last few years, in drought years, our primary source of water is groundwater. So it just needs to be clarified that it could be either one of those. And then just in the clarification below that, where it speaks about the wild waterfall fire, it doesn't say specifically what damage that caused as it relates to our drinking water. And the clarification there is just because of the burned area. There was a lot more nutrients that flowed into the streams, both Ash and King, into that drinking water source that we could not treat. So that was the damage that was caused by the waterfall fire and how it affected our two streams in that area. So,
thank you.
Yes.
Well, we'd be happy to add that information and make the modification. Thank you for the information.
Moving on to section 6, page 16, in the very first paragraph. Last sentence, previous occurrences of acts of violence include the IHOP, a criminal act in 2011, as well as protests and rallies at the Capitol building in 2021 and citywide protests throughout 2020. I'm not aware of any violence at the rallies and protests. Can you clarify what you're talking about there?
That was information provided by the sheriff's office, and we can certainly clarify with them about what the instances were of that violence.
At the end of the sentence, it said, and citywide protests. I'm not aware that we had any citywide protests.
Okay.
As far as I know, everything happened downtown and over at the governor's mansion. Finally, it says that the protests and rallies took place at the Capitol building. In fact, they have taken place in front of the legislature building and at the governor's mansion. Moving on to section 8, page 18. Down at 5F, says, upon completion of land transfers associated with the lands bill. What lands bill?
Southern Nevada, SNPLMA.
Might be good to clarify that.
We'll be happy to clarify it, and thank you for the additional information. We welcome anything to clarify data that
Thank you.
we have.
Still in section 8, page 20 at 5K. continue land acquisition of buildings with recurring loss. Can you explain what that means? Continue land acquisition of buildings.
Yes, sir. So under the flood mapping, under flood programs, if there are structures that incur in loss due to flood, they're called recurring loss. And so this talks about acquiring those structures or the land, regardless of whether it is developed or not. And that is something that Carson City has been doing for the past 20 years. So it's a continuation of that activity.
I'm just confused with the structure of that first part of that sentence. Land acquisition of buildings. I don't quite understand what that really means. I understand the action that's taking place. It just doesn't seem to me like those 4 words are portraying what it is you're trying to say.
It is something that the planning team created. And so we'll be happy to go ahead and talk to your floodplain manager and see if we can modify that language to fit a better definition.
Let's talk about hazard ranking. I noticed that in meeting 1, it was suggested that cyber attacks be added to the ranking. And in fact, it was added and made into the number 1 rating. And then in the final document, back to section 5, page 6, cyber attacks have been removed. I found only a few very minor comments about cyber attacks in general. So take us through what was going on there when cyber attacks were included, and then the decision process to take them out. I ask this question because in my mind, I believe cyber attacks are likely to be our number 1 issue. As I read through the manual from FEMA about creating this document, it talks solely about natural hazards.
Correct.
So is it appropriate to have this man-made hazard included here, of course, in a manner that doesn't give up any security secrets that we need to keep off the street from people? So how did it get in? Why is it out? Can we put it in?
So it did get in. We had a subject matter expert come in and chat with us at that first meeting about cybersecurity. And probably that's why it was ranked number 1 at that, after that meeting. The ability of the capability of the city's GIS staff was such at that point that it was determined that we could not address it appropriately in this iteration of the plan. So it was removed from consideration. It has no bearing on the natural hazards that are addressed, and you're correct, FEMA does not require man-made hazards to be included. It is totally up to the community to determine whether they want to identify it or address it in the hazard mitigation plan or not.
Deputy City Manager Hicks, did you have a comment on that?
I did. I just wanted to provide some clarification, Supervisor White. At the time that we were identifying hazards, I was involved in that portion of the planning process, and we did identify cybersecurity as something that we felt would be a good component to include. When communities do these projects, they can, because it is a picture of your community. So while FEMA's requirements are specific to natural hazards, they don't disallow communities from adding some of those man-made hazards, which include the civil unrest as well as cybersecurity. At that time, the CIO had recommended that we include it, and we all agreed that that was an element we could include. But then we did have some changes in staff, and because it was not a FEMA requirement, we felt it would be better at this point to not, or at that point to not burden the existing staff with the requirements to get this into the plan in such a short time frame, knowing that we could add those components later. Further, knowing that It's really a general overview that would be provided within this plan, and a much more detailed cybersecurity plan would be something we would not include in this public document. So those were the reasons that went behind our determination.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Let's go to section 5, page 19. Let's talk about climate change. Down towards the bottom, there's a sentence that says, changes observed in Earth's climate since the early 20th century are primarily driven by human activities, particularly fossil fuel burning. I would offer to you scientists Willis Eckenbach, John Shanahan, via Hara, that are published, peer-reviewed scientists that debunk that idea. I understand that there are two competing sides to this particular issue, and to be honest with you, I think it is very politicized and polarizing, and in a document of this nature, I think we should leave the politics out of it. There goes quite a dissertation about what climate change is doing and what it's caused by. I will spare you the hours that I could spend debunking each one of these statements, but I do want to point out at the bottom where it says satellite-based observations of Arctic sea ice extent show a downward trend in all months of the year. This report from the National Snow and Ice Data Center, dated September 2, 2021, says, ice extent declined more slowly during August 21 than most years in the past decade. And as a result, this year's September minimum extent will likely be among the highest since 2007. So, Livewire information tells us that that comment is simply not true. I'm a little concerned that throughout this nearly 1,000 pages that we received to review, there's a lot of discussion about climate change and its impact. Yet in the goals, we do not have a direct and specific goal about what Carson City is going to do in regards to climate change. It's listed as a priority, but it has no action item directly attached to climate change that I could find.
So most of the activities for climate change or the impacts caused by climate change to Carson City, drought and wildfire, are addressed in their individual goals. So if climate change causes...
So are you in part 2 there? I want to get on the same page you're on.
I'm not on any page, sir.
So we're just saying the secondary effect of climate change is fire, flood, those natural disasters. And so the mitigation, so what we're trying to focus on in this plan is mitigation efforts of how we can minimize those impacts. And specifically with that is we can't stop climate change, as far as I know anyways, if there is such a thing. So the fire floods are what we were trying to focus on.
Okay.
Fire, floods, drought, that's what we focused on, yes.
But again, a lot of emphasis is put on climate change.
Mm-hmm.
But you do not identify anything Carson City can do to mitigate climate change. I don't know how you give it such significance and then not address climate change itself. Understand you're addressing the impacts that you perceive, or somebody does anyway,
Mm-hmm.
of climate change. But it's a little disappointing you don't have a direct action to mitigate climate change.
Well, we welcome input. If you have some solutions, we'd love to include them. And it's not something that, as we mentioned, it's a living plan, so it can be modified at any time. It is your plan, so absolutely, modify it to fit your needs.
Thank you. And I do appreciate the effort. 1,000 pages.
So it's a requirement for FEMA to address climate change. That is one hazard they require us to address, and I understand your concern. The planning team tried to address the impacts of climate change through other cascading effects, and that's how we addressed it. But again, it's Carson City's plan. Please feel free to modify it, change it, if you want to include information from those scientists that counter the information that we currently have. Absolutely, please include it.
I would say then that if the intent of having climate change mentioned in here is to fold it into comments that it impacts fire, flood, and that sort of thing, then perhaps it should not be listed as one of the primary hazards. If it's not something we can address directly, perhaps it needs to come off of that list.
Again, it's your plan. If that's something that you would recommend, we can certainly go to the planning team and discuss that issue and modify it accordingly.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you. Supervisor Giomi?
It has to be on the list. Yes, sir.
Okay, so then we can't take it off the list. So it has to be on the list. So that's that.
So then it's not our
Table-
plan.
Could
It's
you pull
FEMA's
that table
plan.
back up,
Well,
though?
look, it's always
'Cause
like that.
Just so we can see something, because we gave, it said new, where you added in climate change. There's one of them on there. You had it in 3 columns.
It's the hazards
There
number
you go.
5. Mhm.
So when you look at the updates, and potentially one of the issues we could discuss is whether or not, so you had high, which can I understand? So really, we're addressing as our highest priorities of what this city is going to work on for hazard mitigation are the items in the first column. Those are our high priorities. That's what we're really setting about to have accomplishment and goals. And so when I then look at moderate, that's the next set that we would put our concentration efforts on. And potentially, one of our discussion points is whether climate change, since we don't have any specific mitigations for that, should that move to low? Because it really isn't, and I agree, I don't know that we as Carson City have some measure or some mitigation that we can do to the overall climate change, but we don't ignore the fact that it potentially impacts everything that we have in high and everything that we have in moderate. But since we have no specific goal, maybe it's simply the emphasis for that should go with avalanche and volcanoes. So not that we're not aware of them and that they could impact us, but it's not something our plan can actually address as a specific mitigation that Carson City is going to do. So I offer that maybe as we recognize the issue of climate change, but it isn't the priority of the Carson City Board looking for what mitigations. We're going to concentrate on earthquakes and wildfires and floods and severe weather. So I offer that as a thought process for us all, is just to make sure it's identified in the plan as to how the city's going to address it.
That may well be the way to go, because if you look at section 8, page 3, it lays out the 11 goals.
Right.
Those goals do include looking at drought, landslides, materials, and that such. So rearranging that graph right there to put climate change in low may well be the thing to do.
Because we have no specific
Right.
goals that we can offer at this point to meet that challenge. And this is our roadmap. I think it's important for everyone to understand. It's our roadmap for where the staff's going to be working on, what we're looking to mitigate next year, the year after. And also, again, it doesn't mean if someone comes up with a climate change opportunity nationally, locally, or anything
Right.
else, that we wouldn't consider it. It just isn't currently something that we have a tool in our toolbox, I guess is kind of what I'm stating here. And maybe you have a comment on that.
So, yeah, I agree, and I see what you're saying, and we can certainly move that. But just as a reminder or information, the way that these rankings came was from this extremely long process of 50-some people that submitted this huge, long survey, and they did a ranking and put their formulas together, and this is how it came out. So it wasn't like we made line by line by line, it created this form. There was a lot to where that came, and if it's not significant or appropriate or pertinent, we'll certainly move that stuff around. That's not the issue, because the idea is, why are we doing this? We're doing this first of all for FEMA funding, and second of all for that roadmap, so we know where we want to go, where we want to focus our emphasis and energy on.
I wasn't quite done, so if I may,
I'm sorry.
I know.
Supervisor
Thank you.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I would be reluctant to just alter the work of months of folks who provided input. Having been through the development of at least 3 hazard mitigation plans personally, I can speak to the amount of work that the committee puts into ranking these, and it isn't just, as Chief Danon said, a matter of oh, I think that's a big deal, so we're going to put it here. A lot more goes into it than that. I would argue there are things we can do to combat climate change at the local level. I don't think we have to get into that discussion here, but we have jack buses that, just as a quick example, more use of which would reduce, carbon emissions. Just as a brief example. Anyway, I think the things that Supervisor White brought up, where things are sort of out there out of context, need to be fixed. Absolutely, I agree with that. I would just caution this body to keep in mind that this is a roadmap, that, we're looking at ways to mitigate some of these things. And quite frankly, as Danon said, if we don't have this, we're not going to get any funding should we have a disaster. So I'm not saying don't overthink it, but I'm kind of saying don't overthink it. I mean, I think the plan as a whole, with the corrections, particularly that you brought up, where there are things that have out of context, the components that need to be fixed over there. That makes sense. Probably granting you authority to go ahead and make some non-substantive changes where there are grammatical errors. I think we give you that authority. And then I'd like to know what the process is for us to give you input, because the change in this document, remember, this is already approved by FEMA. So we really can't make huge changes, or we're going to have to turn around and go back to FEMA, which makes us vulnerable to not having an approved plan in place should a disaster strike. So what is the interim process? The interim process used to be you collect data over the interim 5-year period, and then you incorporate your changes when you develop a new plan at the end of those 5 years.
Correct.
So, I'd like to offer that up as really the basis for how we go forward, because if we substantively change this document and begin to move things around, even taking climate change out of moderate and putting it at a low, we're going to have to turn it around and send it back to FEMA. If we do that, we sit without a hazard mitigation plan. So if an earthquake strikes from the time that our last plan ends, which might already be over.
It is over.
August
4th.
So we're vulnerable right now. So I would just caution the board, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
So the
So
recommendation.
we're without a plan right now, is what you're saying? August 4th, we expired on our
Correct.
Last plan.
Yeah. So my recommendation is that you go ahead and adopt the plan with revisions as suggested. Do not change the rankings. Do not change your action items. We can change the language without an issue. Go ahead and adopt it. Have the planning team meet afterwards and make any corrections you want. Because once it's adopted by you and you have a letter from FEMA saying you're approved, it's a live document. You can go ahead and make any changes you wish. but that would ensure that you have your eligibility for the next 5 years.
And those changes need to come back to the board, or can we come up with a way to grant probably the future resolution, the planning committee, the authority to make those changes?
That's what we're asking for.
The emergency manager, who is the lead for the
Does it
project.
say that in the resolution?
I believe so. At the
Okay.
very end, I believe it does say that.
Dan?
Pardon,
Or,
Supervisor
sorry.
Gioni, yeah, that's okay. Adam
sorry.
Tully for the record. Can you just, can you ask your question one more time? I didn't quite follow, and I want to make sure it is.
Sure. So if there are suggested changes that we as a board want, or that the planning team wants to make, what's the process for those changes in terms of the authority of the document, so to speak? I mean, do changes have to come back before this board, or can we authorize the planning team to make those changes and have them be effective? And if so, where is that authority?
Sure. So, I'm not entirely sure. Liz, you said
I don't see it.
not in terms of the, but where can the, in terms of updating, there is a CF, I'm looking right now at 44 CFR 201.6.
There is no requirement for FEMA to come, once you have adopted the document and FEMA has approved it, there is no requirement for the planning team or for you to, the planning team has the authority, you have the authority to make any changes, you as the community. You can make any changes you wish after the adoption and the approval by FEMA. It starts the life of the new plan, which means you can modify it.
And part of that's.
But nothing in our resolution grants the authority for someone other than this board to amend it, to amend the plan, so that, right?
I believe that's
it's adopted by FEMA, formally approve it. We're the approving body, and I see nothing in the resolution granting permission. So we could, as a board today, approve this plan, allow for the non-substantive discussion that Mr. White had discussed a few of the things with the pipes and the things that aren't clarified appropriately in the plan for further. That's a good idea to make those more clear. And then if the planning group wants further amendments of discussion, maybe just a thought process out loud here, we want to gain that point that you talked about, so we could have an annual review of the plan to gain our point, and then you can come back with, we want to re-rank, we want to change the plan, here's what we found out over this year worked or didn't work, so that it would come back during our annual report period and we would amend as necessary at that time. Does
Yeah.
that seem like a feasible
Yeah, I think maybe
methodology?
the annual review would be a review of mitigation actions and of disasters, but also of
Plan.
suggested changes.
Right. And we just
by the
operate that
planning
way?
team. I
How's
mean,
that?
yeah,
Okay.
I'm not saying this board can't provide input, but my opinion is the board should provide input through the planning process, not from the dais. That's just my feeling, because it's vitally important to have that input provided in an environment where you have subject matter experts and be able to debate it, as opposed to us sitting on high, it's just my opinion, and dictating to the planning committee what should be included in the plan. So in my mind, it's very important for any input should happen not as a directive, but during a full body review.
I understand that, but I also have to say that I think we each have a job and we are the final authority to review. And while I give probably 95% deference to the boards, commissions, committees, the people that work very hard on everything, it doesn't mean every plan is 100% correct that is provided to us. But I agree that.
with you. I guess what
yeah,
I'm saying to you is that sometimes.
I'm not going to willy-nilly do it.
Sometimes you
right?
make, sometimes, and I'm not saying you, sometimes an individual
Right.
sitting up here makes a comment that they want XYZ changed without a discussion or in context with the experts to understand that. And it's difficult to bring all those experts, all 40 experts, into this public meeting
Yes, I
to,
agree.
to discuss why the change that we're suggesting is not
Yeah,
appropriate.
and unfortunately, since our other plan is expired, we can't kick this back for a discussion, because I agree with you. Normally, in a process, I like to kick it back to the body, because they might not have considered
I guess
our
that's,
discussion
that's what I'm
points.
saying.
Okay.
That's exactly
We're
what I'm
on the
saying.
same page.
So I think in the
Supervisor
context
Giomino.
that it is,
Right.
if they come to us with suggested
Right.
changes, our response should, in my opinion, should not be
Right,
change this, period, but
right.
to kick it back to that body and say, please consider X,
These.
Y, and Z. Consider the things that,
Mhm.
that, Mo has brought up and address
Right.
those issues.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement with that. Supervisor Shooty?
And I've been back and forth on my hand up and down as some of my concerns were addressed or comments, and then something else came to be. I think it's really important to reiterate that this really was a process. I sat on it, and I was involved with discussion and question and answer and back and forth, and the homework assigned. And one night it was like 10 or 10:30 at night, and I'm emailing back because of some of my questions or questions about the ranking or wanting to better understand the question. And I found that in the dialogue back and forth, that was kind of a shared, we all were very committed and very open to the nuance of language and what that can mean. So while the results, you have the high, medium, low, it's not that that is within its own vacuum. It truly is as a result of not only what Carson City is facing and those more critical areas, but also, and this is where the climate change comes in, those mitigating factors of the cause of some of these potential issues, disasters, hazards. And while we can debate whether it exists or not, and we can show evidence and reports, the reality is we're seeing wildfire, we're seeing with severe weather, we're seeing drought. And so let's focus on ways to best meet those problems and those hazards so that our community isn't really faced with a terrible situation with loss of life and suffering and loss of property. So I'm so grateful for this process, and I absolutely appreciate the corrections to clarify the language. But I also really want to get on record that this was a very involved process, and so it's not taken lightly.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other comments? Not seeing, oh, Supervisor White, we're ready.
So, yeah, just to address that for a minute, I do 100% respect the work that went into this. I have been through these kind of planning situations as well. And again, the work I put into reading 1,000 pages is minuscule compared to what it took to create that 1,000 pages. And I came here today, regardless of the conversation, I came here today prepared to vote yes on this.
Thank you. Okay. Supervisor Giomi, did you want to make a motion?
I'd like
Yep.
to if we're ready.
So-
I move to approve resolution number 2021-R-25 and further to grant staff the authority to make non-substantive and clarifying changes discussed on the record today and those that they discover that were not on the record to the hazard mitigation plan, and further to direct staff to return annually to present this body with the matrix and the progress made.
May I make a suggestion?
I'd love one.
Supervisor Jimmy, if instead the motion could modify the resolution itself, and so I'm looking in particular, I believe it's page 2 of the resolution, right after the now therefore.
Yes.
And line 1 there, you could say something like, subject to non-substantive corrections discussed on the record, and the updated asset values. And then I believe the rest of the resolution could remain as is, provided that I'll also ask, it sounded towards the end that the board wasn't necessarily looking to delegate specific authority to anyone at this point. In that case, I think the resolution would be fine as is, subject to my suggestion.
So we could adopt the resolution allowing the conforming change to be made by the district attorney's office pursuant to discussion today. And you'll make that conforming change in number 1.
Yes.
It's an easier way to let him wordsmith it correctly.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's fine. Then you can, I will accept your
Friendly
comment
amendment.
as a motion.
Is there a second?
But I don't want to discount the fact that I want
Oh, yes, in the plan.
on the record that it gets brought back, and you didn't address that.
Okay.
We're just doing the conforming change to number 1 in the resolution and adding on yours that the plan will come back annually for a report on the status of the plan
Yeah,
and
and
any
review.
recommended changes to the plan. Right?
So do you want that in the resolution as well?
Yeah. Deputy Dan, you
Deputy
please?
Dan?
I'd like to just weigh in on this real quick. I mean, I agree with Adam's suggestion for the revision of the resolution itself, as he explained. I don't think it's necessary to include that latter part of it, to revisit the board with additional suggestions or changes in the future, for that also to be included in the resolution. I think the scope of the agenda title is broad enough as published to fit both actions. Not all of that has to be captured by the resolution itself. And I think that would probably actually muddy the waters a little bit too much for the purpose of the resolution, which is just to adopt it by this board, submit it to FEMA. FEMA has already indicated to the city that it will accept the plan. You know, it's just currently formulated. And I don't think we want to muddy that too much right now with additional conditions that would be contained in the resolution. So my suggestion would be, just to clarify again for this board, I agree with Adam's suggestion that we include, you know, any sort of conforming changes, any clerical changes as described on the board meeting today for inclusion in that resolution. But the further direction by the members of this board for the committee to come back in future months to revisit the issues, I don't think that needs to be included in the resolution. You know, of course, I know, you know, Adam Tolley, as the DDA assigned to this task, has kind of led the charge, but that would be my suggestion unless he disagrees with that.
Okay, so to clarify, my motion, the way I originally stated it, would be withdrawn. I would do another motion to modify the resolution to number 1, to allow, to say, subject to non-substantive changes and changes read into the record. And that's it on the resolution. And then additionally, to request that this get brought back annually, period.
That sounds perfect.
Okay, well, that's it then. Did you get that, Tamar? Thank God.
Just for clarity's sakes, right? He's saying that the DA assigned will make that
Yes,
conforming
correct.
change.
That's
So
what
that
I'm
he
saying.
gets the language exactly correct. Thank you. Do I have a second to the motion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Oh, we got through that one. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the efforts. Okay, we're going to open up agenda item 20A and 20B as they are related items. We will take separate motions as required. I think Hope and Heather are coming up. Oh, Heather, thank you. I think we're pretty versed in this item. But if you can just give us a brief overview, because I think we're pretty familiar here.
Sure, Heather Ferris for the record. So the subject property is approximately 1 acre in size. It's located on the south side of South Sutro Terrace, approximately 1/4 mile west of Gonai Road. And the site is developed with a single-family residence. The master plan designation for the subject parcel is industrial. Staff became aware that this property was on the market when we were contacted by a realtor this past spring. We researched the zoning to determine whether it was a mapping error or if the zoning and master plan were in fact correct. After researching, staff found a lawsuit from the mid-1980s, which outlined the history of the zoning the zoning for the parcel. In the 1970s, the parcel was rezoned several times. From residential 1 acre in 1975 to general industrial and ultimately to limited industrial in 1979. In 1979, the property owners at the time also began construction of their home, which was allowed in the limited industrial zoning district. However, under today's zoning regulations, the residential use is considered a non-conforming use. I would note it is not unusual for a property owner that has a home on property that is not zoned residentially to wish to maintain the non-residential zoning while living in the home for resale purposes, and I believe that was likely the case for the previous property owners. The current property owner is in the process of selling the property and is requesting an amendment to the master plan and zoning maps to reflect the actual residential use. The proposed master plan is low-density residential, and the proposed zoning is single-family 1 acre. Both are consistent with the properties immediately to the west and northwest of the subject property. The board is authorized to approve both the zoning map amendment and master plan map amendment after receiving recommendation from the Planning Commission. At their August 25th, 2021 meeting, the Planning Commission made all findings in the affirmative and is recommending approval of both the master plan amendment and zoning map amendment to the board. I'm available for questions, and I believe the applicant is also in the audience.
Thank you so much. Does any member have a question of Ms. Ferris? Is it necessary? I'm assuming one of you is the applicant. Do you have any other comment, or you're good? Okay. What's the pleasure of the board then? We need to take up 20A first. Supervisor White?
Yes, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the amendment to the master plan use map as presented.
I have a motion and a second for approval of the amendment to the master plan map. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. We'll now take a motion on item 20B, as in boy. Supervisor White?
I move to introduce on first reading Bill number 114.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Okay, well, we're close. We got to have a second reading, and then it'll be all done for you. Thank you so much. Gonna get there, huh? We have a technical second reading, and then we'll be good to go. All right, thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna move on. Let's see, we've been all over the place today, so we're on to 22A, unless I'm missing anything. Okay, this is 22A, is discussion and possible action regarding the proposed reorganization of the city manager's office. Ms. Paulson, just a brief overview and see if we have any questions.
All right, anytime there's a retirement, we always take this opportunity to do a review of the department structure and the needs and how the department can provide better customer service. This is being brought to the board outside of the budget process due to the upcoming retirement of our current business manager. Janet has been in the city manager's office for over 28 years, and she is just so amazing that she can't be replaced, and that's why we had to eliminate her position.
I hope she's hearing this. Yeah.
Yeah, she's gonna hit me later. Anyway, so we would like to eliminate the department business manager position and create a government affairs liaison / PIO position. And this new position would serve to manage the government affairs programs within Carson City, to include the state and federal lobbying, and to ensure that Carson City's interests are represented at the local, state, and national levels. And in addition to that, we are requesting that the office manager position be eliminated, and the office specialist position be eliminated, and create an office manager position. This would be Rachel's current position. She will take on additional duties that with the elimination of the business manager position. And so continue to coordinate the development and posting of the board's agendas, as well as provide other administrative support.
Thank you. Does any member have a question? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion. Oh, I'm sorry, Stan, I didn't see your hand
So
up.
what is the salary range on these two positions, this new position versus the old?
It's in your packet.
So there's no change between the department business manager position and the government affairs liaison position. The range is currently $63,378 to $95,068.
Just so the record is clear, at maxed out, topped out salary differences in the city manager's office, it is $32,870.16. However, we are eliminating one of our legislative contracts with the Walkers. That is $43,500. So the net gain is about $10,000 to the city budget. So it's a positive general fund adjustment of about $10,000 if we hired staff at everybody at the top of the range, just to put on the record. Okay. Anybody? I'm ready for a motion. Supervisor Giomi?
I move to approve the reorganization of the city manager's office as requested.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for approval of the reorganization. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you so much. We're going to now move on to agenda item number 23. Ms. Paulson, is there anything to report?
No additional items?
Does any member of the board have any comments they'd like to make? Supervisor Schutte?
Hi, thank you. I actually have a couple of comments. I'd like to give a huge thank you to Jennifer Diamond with Public Works. She gave the Water Subconservancy team a tour of the water treatment center yesterday, and wow, it was amazing. And she really is just so knowledgeable, and made a kind of a, I don't know if it's a difficult subject, but when you're talking about waste management, made it really interesting and fun and silly and so enlightening. So well done, Jennifer. I also, earlier this morning, there was a public comment regarding public comments. And while it is, the prerogative of the mayor to decide when public comment will be heard, whether it's specific to the agenda item or before the meeting, I think it's really important to note that people's voices aren't being silenced. That's what public comment is. And while there might be some preference by some, actually including me, to have public comment tied to each agenda item, to have it before or after is the opportunity to speak. And so when it was said that people are being silenced, I just feel that that's not accurate. Folks do have an opportunity to speak, and I think it's so incredibly important. Finally, and this is a long one, but it's super, super important. So during the Calder fire evacuations, Carson City staff were tasked with numerous requests for service above and beyond their normal duties. As a volunteer at the Fuji Park Animal Evacuation Site, I saw firsthand staff's willingness to help evacuees as the Red Cross discontinued its services to move to the Reno site. Community members volunteered alongside Nevada Humane Society and Cassie to care for the displaced animals while donations poured in. Food, kennels, bedding, kitty litter, and portable fans were donated by concerned citizens wanting to ease the burden of both animals and their people. Throughout these difficult days, Parks and Rec and Public Works staff helped with logistical issues brought on by the tough circumstances that people were having to manage. This was especially challenging due to the numerous agencies involved and the sometimes inconsistent messaging that can occur when situations change rapidly. Even after animals and their owners left the area, there was still a lot of work to be done. The large quantities of pet food and supplies that had been donated and not already shared with affected pet owners, local nonprofits, and for their future needs, the staff helped move equipment, and it was so with the help of staff and equipment from Public Works, we were able to successfully transport the numerous pallets of food and equipment. Carson City rose to the occasion in our assistance with the Calder fire evacuations in no small part due to Carson City staff, nonprofits, and volunteers who were in the trenches dealing with and having compassion for the needs of real people and their animals. These evacuations were not just about logistics management, they were about helping our neighbors. And so to Darren Schultz, Jennifer Budge, and their amazing teams, a huge shout out and thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Lisa. Supervisor Giomi?
Thank you, Mayor. I too want to comment quickly on the public comment discussion and just also reiterate what Lisa said, that, while we are meeting the intent of the law, the city has often gone above and beyond. And while I would like to see public comment after every agenda item, and I've said that several times in the past year, I also recognize and respect the mayor's position to be able to make that determination. And so while I don't necessarily agree, I do respect the position and the authority there, and would comment that we have added the ability for citizens to make written comments on the record that can be incorporated into the permanent record of the meeting minutes, which is not quite the same, but in other regards, I think offers some better opportunities. So that's my position relative to that. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Secondarily, this is one of those busy weeks. Had a CTE meeting on Monday and a Water Subconservancy meeting last night. CTA, I reported to you last month that the month of June was the highest net room tax revenue received, and July beat that. And there's a good possibility that August will as well. The fires, while tragic for the South Lake Tahoe Basin, meant a pretty big increase in room occupancy here in Carson City and really the surrounding area. So that was the reason behind that. On a more positive note, the Arts and Cultural Manager with the Convention and Tourism Authority is not resting on her laurels. She's working on several projects, one of which is going to be coming before our board, which is an update to the Arts and Cultural Master Plan, which this board owns. and is reviewed by the Arts and Cultural Commission, which we appoint. And so that's coming up in October, I believe. Nancy's gone, but October, I believe. Stephanie, yeah. And so just look forward to that. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the work that she has done. One of the things I'm excited about is integrating arts and cultural components in our community into a GIS component that allows people to find and locate cultural high points, if you will. And it was a project that was started years ago, but she's really excited about it. So I think you'll be pleased as well. From the Water Subconservancy District, there's no reporting on our water year. It's dismal, obviously. The new water year starts October 1. This will be, I believe, the second driest water year since they've been keeping record, which is late 1800s, mid 1800s, 1860, 1870, somewhere in there. The other thing Carson Water Subconservancy District is working on is a regional water use plan. The state requires every water purveyor, there are 12 water purveyors in the Carson River Basin, and every water purveyor is required by the state to have a water plan. I think we're going to have our water plan come to us sometime in the next month or two. But what the Carson Water Subconservancy District wants to do over the next 4 to 5 years is take each of those county plans and sort of layer them so we can look at, on a regional basis, how our water plan may affect a different water purveyor's plan. And so I applaud them for that, and I think it'll be a really good document for a region that that is so dependent upon water. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Supervisor White.
Thank you. Never one to skirt a controversy. I'll speak on public comment as well. I would just like to point out that while we would all like to be able to speak on each agenda item, as Mayor Kroll allowed through his entire tenure, Carson City does offer more opportunities than what the open meeting law requires. The open meeting law has been constitutionally tested. If you want to talk about having your First Amendment squished, I suggest you visit the Reno City Council or perhaps the Las Vegas County Commission and see how they operate. They are offering no more than what the law says you have to do. I'll also point out, I know of one entity that serves in Nevada that in their agenda noticing that they say submitted written comments cannot be more than 750 words because generally that's longer than the 3 minutes the law allows. While I have debated this comment on each item with the mayor, it is her prerogative. And what is available is far and above the minimum requirements. I sit on the OHV Commission, and very shortly you will see some public announcements that the grants that are offered due to the creation of this entire law will soon be let to the public. So if you know any OHV groups that has trail creation and maintenance projects that they want to put into place, get those folks to start looking at that OHV website. And then finally, I guess more or less on a personal note, we had a very good weekend at the prison, and I want to thank especially the tourism folks that helped us get the arrangements for about 135 adults dressed up in camouflage to spend 3 days chasing one another around and shooting BB guns at each other. What an event.
With biodegradable.
With biodegradable BBs, yes. I have to tell you, at the end of that third day, when the cleanup crew came in, what a mess. Took the cleanup crew 8 hours to clean that prison.
Wow.
All in all, Carson City has a new venue that is going to be the final piece in putting this city on the tourism map.
It's a wonderful
incredible.
resource. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's truly a wonderful resource.
That's all I have.
Thank you. So just in general, since everyone commented, public comment is important, and I don't want anyone to think that it isn't. I also don't want anyone to misunderstand what your rights are. We meet the requirements and exceed them. The discussion point is whether or not some would like to speak at the individual agenda item. And I understand that. They want to debate those that have testified. They want to hear the comment and then tailor their comments to that. And I understand it. While in general, I might be willing to consider that at a point, I have not chosen to do so for this reason. We are under a COVID restriction. Whether we agree with it or not, it does not matter. We are under a restriction. My objective was to get the public in and out as quickly as possible to eliminate or minimize their exposures. And to all of us in this room, we're here to do the business of the city, and none of us want to get sick. None of us. Whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, I'm not passing judgment on any of that. But my job is to keep us as safe as possible. So that's why I've made the decision in the way in which I manage this. It is my prayer and hope that something changes and we get out of the masks, we get out of this condition, and then I'll reconsider my decision. But as you can see, I think for the most part, the public enjoys knowing that they're at 8:30 in the morning. They can get what they want to say on anything on the agenda. They even get to talk about things that aren't on the agenda. So there is no suppression of public comment. And I'm just a little bit tired of hearing that. You can write to us, you can phone us. We have opened up public comment that is put and attached to a record, which we never had before. We have done everything in our power to improve the processes for public comment. You matter to me, your comments matter to me. They are always listened to. We don't always act on them because we all also have our rights to determine what we want to do to move forward. But I just want to put that on the record that the individual, even this morning, while he thinks we have no public comment, he's managed to be here every meeting making public comment. So I just want to put that on the record that it just isn't so. The sole discussion is whether or not you should have to sit through the entire day for your agenda item to come forward to make your public comment. And for right now, until we can get, and I'm going to be super honest, since that's what we're doing here, I don't even have everyone in this room wearing a mask. And I get that you agree or don't agree. I'm trying my best to honor your wishes, right? While honoring everyone else's in this room. And that's why I've chosen public comment the way that I have. So with that, we will move on. Is there any final public comment on the phone?
There's no callers on the line at this time.
Thank you so much. I have a few remaining in the audience. Do I have any final public comment? Ms. Straczynski? Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I appreciate your comments. The 2020 presidential election, in my opinion, was the most corrupt election in the history of the United States. The fraud that occurred was brought to light by Mike Lindell and prominent computer analysts and experts and many others. One very important detail we learned was the ability of the Dominion voting systems used in Nevada and throughout the United States to be controlled by corrupt software, which was manipulated by foreign sources, enabling the votes to be changed from one candidate to another. This fraud committed in the 2020 election has led to audits being conducted in Arizona, Georgia, and possibly other swing states because they used Dominion voting system. It was also discovered that Dominion voting systems had the ability to accept photo ballots, which is illegal in Georgia and Arizona and most other states. Also, signature verification can be set to a very low standard, thus allowing acceptance of fake signatures, and this happened in Clark County, Nevada. It is interesting to note that this year France banned electronic voting systems because of what happened in the United States in the 2020 election. It was also determined by Mike Lindell and others that mail-in ballots lead to fraud. Postal ballots can be stolen and voters can cast multiple votes, and mail-in ballots were used to cast votes by dead people. Assembly Bill 321, passed by the Democrat-controlled legislature, permanently changed voting rules, keeping the door open to massive voter fraud. We have no voter ID. We still use Dominion voting systems in most counties and have all mail-in voting unless we opt out. This is a travesty. These issues must be addressed to ensure a future fair election. Otherwise, voter fraud will continue and we will not have citizens, their votes count. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Straczynski. I appreciate your comments. Do I have any further public comment? You've sat all day. Thank you for learning about your government. Yes, thank you. This is our first time watching an entire. There you go. Thank you so much. There's no further business to come before us. We're adjourned. Thank you all for a good meeting. Hope.